Okay, we are live.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the April 20th, 2021 public hearing, public meeting of the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission. We appreciate your patience while we work to resolve the issue. I will call the roll. Chair Carroll.
Here.
Commissioner Bland.
Here.
Commissioner Shamir Barron.
Here.
Commissioner Chapin. Commissioner Chen.
Yeah.
Commissioner Devonshire.
Here.
Commissioner Goldblum.
Here.
Commissioner Gustafson.
Here.
Commissioner Jefferson.
Here.
Commissioner Lutfi.
Here.
And Commissioner Holford Smith.
Here.
Okay, we're all set.
Okay, thank you, and welcome to the April 20th public hearing and public meeting. And again, thank you for your patience as we worked with Zoom to resolve the technical issues. Today, we will start the day with a public hearing on 2 items that are proposed for designation, and that will be followed by a public hearing for applications for work on designated properties. And finally, we'll end the day with a public meeting to review applications that have already had a public hearing and for which we've already heard testimony and given comments, and the applicants are returning with revised designs. This hearing and meeting is being held via Zoom and live streamed on YouTube. So if you'd like to just watch the proceedings, you may do so on YouTube, and you can go to our YouTube channel to watch that live stream. If you would like to testify in any of the items, please join the meeting at the estimated time as shown on the hearing agenda, which can be found on our website. But please note we are about 45 minutes behind schedule. So as you look at the estimated times, just sort of factor that in. And you can always keep watching on YouTube to see where we are if we make up some of the time during the day. So with that, I will turn it over to Kate Lumos-McHale, our Director of Research, who will start the public hearing agenda for the designation items. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks everyone for your patience. The first item this morning is LP 2651, the proposed Dorrance Brooks Square Historic District in Harlem and the Borough of Manhattan. The boundaries are described in the agenda and in this presentation. The proposed Dorrance Brooks Square Historic District features a striking variety of architectural styles, buildings designed by prominent New York City architects. This residential enclave is significant for its association with notable African-American figures during the Harlem Renaissance from the early 1920s through the 1940s. The proposed district features 2 sections, generally bounded by St. Nicholas Avenue to the west, West 140th Street to the south, to the north, West 136th Street to the south, and Adam Clayton Powell Jr. Boulevard to the east. Sweetie, shh, thanks. The eastern section abuts the southern boundary of St. Nicholas Historic District, which was designated in 1967. As we noted when the district was calendared in February, it's an exciting intersection between agency priorities under Chair Carroll's leadership and the Community Board's preservation priorities for Harlem. We've worked closely with Community Board 10 on priorities laid out in their preservation plan, in recent years designating the Mount Morris Historic District Extension and the Central Harlem West 130th to 132nd Street Historic District. These existing districts are outlined in red on this map to illustrate that they correspond with Community Board 10 Historic District study areas. The proposed Dorrance Brooks Square Historic District, also in red, corresponds with 2 more of Community Board 10 study areas. We received a request from the Dorrance Brooks Property Owners and Residents Association to evaluate the eastern section, the western section, and the research team's careful research and analysis identified 2 meritorious areas. They're separated by recent construction along Frederick Douglass Boulevard, but linked historically, architecturally, and by their combined cultural significance. Speculative row house development in the proposed historic district was prompted by the arrival of elevated rail service along Frederick Douglass Boulevard, then 8th Avenue, in 1868, and later in anticipation of the IND 8th Avenue line, which opened in 1932. African Americans who had been pushed by discrimination and demolition out of neighborhoods on the west side of Manhattan began moving to Harlem in the early 20th century. And by the 1920s, middle-class African Americans, including notable intellectuals, artists, actors, educators, and doctors, began to call this part of Harlem home. Under the speculative development model, a developer would purchase multiple adjacent lots, erect maximum number of row houses to fit the subdivided lots, and use available architectural elements to minimize costs. Because of this, as is evident in these images, the proposed historic district is characterized by remarkably cohesive streetscapes. Row house development within the proposed district began in 1887 and continued in clusters through the early 20th century. Here's the area in 1893. I just want to point out on this map, you can see the houses in St. Nicholas Historic District had been completed by this time, as well as roads along West 136th Street to the south and a few blocks in the western section of the proposed district. This map also reveals that the unique plan of St. Nicholas Historic District with its shared driveways extended south to West 137th Street at this time. While those houses were not yet built in this map, their rear yards have historically formed the south side of a shared courtyard and driveway with houses on the south side of West 138th Street in the St. Nicholas Historic District. And the proposed district would unify LPC's oversight of this shared courtyard. This map shows development by 1897, where you see more rows being developed. And then by 1916, all of the row houses in the proposed district had been constructed. Between 1913 and 30, 5 apartment buildings were built to replace earlier row houses and to infill the vacant triangular block that you can still see in this map on the left. Anchored by Dorrance Brook Square, the proposed district was home to prominent African-American individuals and organizations in the early 20th century. Dorrance Brook Square was named for Dorrance Brooks, a Black serviceman who died in action while serving with the segregated military in the First World War. The square was dedicated in 1925 and was the first public space in New York City to honor an African-American in this way. These images show the square in 1926. Dorrance Brooks was widely regarded as a hero and renowned for his bravery and service to our country. His actions helped to dismantle racist notions about Black Americans' fitness for military service. Harry S. Truman later stated about Dorrance Brooks that, quote, "It is to the credit to the people of this great city of New York that his heroism has been appreciated and acknowledged here." Dorrance Brook Square was the location of notable political protests from the 1920s on, and visits from Harry S. Truman in 1948 and 52, when he was given an award for civil rights achievements, including desegregating the US Armed Forces. African-American intellectuals, artists, actors, educators, and the burgeoning Black middle class called this Harlem neighborhood home during the Harlem Renaissance era, approximately from 1915 to 1940. And the proposed historic district has incredible cultural significance dating to this important time in American history. The arts were a way to broadcast the intelligence and talent of African-American creatives who worked in different media to interpret their experience. Among the prominent residents associated with the arts and the literature in the proposed historic district were intellectual and essayist W.E.B. Du Bois, stage and motion picture actress Ethel Waters, and celebrated sculptor Augusta Savage. Artist studios were included in the Harlem Artists Guild and the Uptown included the Harlem Artists Guild and the Uptown Art Laboratory at 321 West 136th Street. The neighborhood was also the center of a vibrant social scene. In their home at 580 St. Nicholas Avenue, Regina Anderson, Luella Tucker, and Ethel Ray Nance fostered the careers of notable Harlem Renaissance artists Countee Cullen, Langston Hughes, and many others by hosting the Harlem West Side Literary Salon, or for those in the know, just 580. These women also opened their home for community gatherings and cultural activities. In addition to Dorrance Brook Square, several buildings in the proposed historic district were the sites of important social activism. These include the National Urban League, founded in 1910 to improve urban conditions for African Americans in New York, and at this location on West 136th Street from 1917 to the present. The White Rose Mission, a settlement house for African American women and girls, also on West 136th Street, there from 1918 to 1984. W.E.B. Du Bois residence His home from 1921 to 25 is located in this district and corresponds with the time he worked at the national office of the NAACP in 75th Avenue, which is also calendared for consideration as a landmark. Walter F. White residence, he lived in two places on Edgecombe Avenue within the historic district between 1929 to 1955. He served as the president of the NAACP. And the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, the first African-American trade union, which was headquartered on West 136th Street under direction of Asa Philip Randolph in 1927. Discriminatory barriers denied African-American doctors the same rights, privileges, and access as their white counterparts, and created the need for African-American doctors to seek alternate avenues to care for the growing population in Harlem. Important hospitals started by African-American doctors to serve the Harlem community are located within the proposed historic district. The Vincent Sanatorium and Hospital at 2348 Adam Clayton Powell Boulevard, and the Edgecombe Sanatorium at 46 Edgecombe Avenue. Dr. May Edward Chin, shown here, was the only Black female doctor practicing in Harlem and served at the Edgecombe Sanatorium through the 1930s. Willis Cummings was one of two Black graduates among 259 students at the University of Pennsylvania School of Dentistry in 1919, and the first Black inductee of a Dental Honor Society. Lived and practiced at 2340 Adam Clayton Powell Jr. Boulevard. The cornerstone of the Harlem Renaissance was education, and notable educators advanced an understanding of African-American history to inform the work of artists and writers within the community. Charles Seifert began to share his vast collection of African art and artifacts and rare historical texts at 313 West 137th Street as the Ethiopian School of Research History. Seifert made it his mission to educate African Americans in African heritage and culture out of his belief that, quote, a race without the knowledge of its history is like the tree without roots, end quote. Visits to Seifert's collection were influential to activist Marcus Garvey, who took up a brief residence in Seifert's home to access his collection, and artists Jacob Lawrence, Romare Bearden, Earl Sweeting, and Robert Savion Pius. Later in the 20th century, Dr. John Henrik Clark, an actor, educator, historian, and pioneer of Pan-African studies, lived at 223 West 137th Street. The street was later named after him in his honor. These two homes served not only as private residences, but also as public archives for the Harlem intellectual community. And finally, religious institutions established in the proposed historic district during the Harlem Renaissance have been important centers of the community. In addition to serving as places of worship, they have offered refuge, a community of like-minded individuals, and places for political activism, education, and employment opportunity. Religious institutions in the Dorrance Brooks Historic District since the Harlem Renaissance include St. Mark's United Methodist Church at 526 St. Nicholas Avenue, built in 1926. The Beulah Wesleyan Methodist Church on West 136th Street, founded in 1913, and its modern facade is the result of a 1968 renovation of row houses the church purchased in 1926. The Grace Congregational Church at 306 to 310 West 139th Street, designed by Joseph Ireland and built in 1892, has been the home to the Grace Congregational Church since 1923. It was dubbed the Actors Church because of its longstanding custom of ministering to performing artists and hosting recitals. The former St. Luke's Episcopal Mission for Negroes at 28 Edgecombe Avenue is shown here, as well as the Mount Calvary United Methodist Church at 118 Edgecombe Avenue, built in 1897 to 98, and was an important African-American congregation here, and also Shirley Chisholm taught in the church's nursery school from 1946 to 1953. This map shows the location of these historically and culturally significant institutions and organizations and buildings associated with notable African-American pioneers, practitioners, and creatives in the field of politics, literature, healthcare, and education during the Harlem Renaissance. And in addition to its cultural significance, the proposed district is characterized by remarkably cohesive streetscapes. The next series of slides show our analysis of the architecture. This map of building dates shows the result of speculative building and phase development. We see some of the older buildings in the proposed district to the south. Most has been built by the first decade of the 20th century. The single post-1930 structure is the Beulah Wesleyan Methodist Church on West 136th Street, shown here on the right. And these are other images of representative buildings from these periods of development within the district. And while they are architecturally cohesive, blocks in the proposed district include row houses, apartment buildings, residential buildings with ground floor storefronts, and institutional buildings that serve the neighborhood. Row houses dominate the side streets, where mixed-use buildings and multifamily dwellings are mostly present on the avenues. And this slide illustrates those typologies. Most blocks feature long, consistent rows representing the work of just one or two architects on behalf of one or two developers. The vast majority of the district's buildings are representative of the Renaissance Revival and Queen Anne styles, with select structures in the Romanesque Revival, Neo-Grec, and Beaux-Arts styles, churches in the Gothic Revival and modern styles, and apartment structures in the Art Deco and Viennese Secession styles. And some examples of those are shown here. And finally, the proposed historic district shows a remarkable degree of architectural integrity with limited alterations as shown in this map. We just had a few additional slides at the calendaring of the proposed district. There were questions about the boundary, in particular along Frederick Douglass Boulevard. So we just wanted to add some slides to illustrate that. There is a 4-block residential development that was built in the 1990s. And so the district boundary primarily follows that lot line. Also above that development, there is a block that has new construction and very altered building, which was difficult to include. And so this is just an image of that new construction, which isn't part of the historic character or cultural significance of the district. And then an example where there's another building of new construction at the end of a row. The boundary does not include that in this location. And across the avenue, similarly, we have another, just a small building that may appear on the map as being historic, but is part of this newer development that was not included. And similarly on West 136th Street, this newer building at the end of the row was not included. So to conclude, with its highly intact streetscapes of late 19th century and early 20th century architecture and rich associations with the Harlem Renaissance and civil rights movements, the proposed historic district is an important reminder of both the early development of this neighborhood, as well as the contributions of the African-American community to the history of New York City and the nation. As we are approaching the 100-year anniversary of the Harlem Renaissance, it's a particularly important and appropriate time to recognize and celebrate the significant cultural and social history of this neighborhood, along with its intact and meritorious architecture as a New York City historic district. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Okay, so Commissioners, I'm going to ask if we have any questions now, and then I'm going to move to testimony because I know that we are a little behind schedule, and I want to make sure that anyone who is here to speak has the opportunity to do so. So we'll take testimony, and then we'll close the hearing, and we can all think about the testimony, and we'll come back to a public meeting in the near future and address issues that were raised in the testimony. So any questions now before we move to the testimony? Okay. So I'm going to turn it over to our Executive Director, Lisa Kersavage, to walk us through the speakers. We'll start with anyone who signed up in advance and then try to get to anyone else who is present and would like to speak. Lisa?
Great. And I would ask everybody who'd like to speak, whether you signed up or not, to please raise your hand. It's very helpful. And let's see. Okay, we'll start with Andrea Goldwyn. And Andrea, I brought you in.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. Having my own technical problems this morning, but I think we're good to go. Thank you. Good morning, Chair Carroll and Commissioners. I'm Andrea Goldwyn, speaking on behalf of the New York Landmarks Conservancy. The Conservancy is so pleased to join residents and advocates to support designation of the Dorrance Square Historic District in Harlem. The two areas that compose the district are notable for their architecture and history. One group surrounding Dorrance Square bridges City College and St. Nicholas Park to the Strivers Row St. Nicholas Historic District. The group to the south of Strivers Row extends the scale and composition of that district. Both areas feature low-scale row houses built in the late 19th and early 20th centuries in the Queen Anne, Renaissance Revival, and Romanesque Revival styles. These masonry-clad houses are largely intact and feature elegant decorative details. Larger residential, institutional, and mixed-use buildings on the avenues complement the rows. The special history of Harlem is manifested in these buildings. They were the homes and studios of individuals connected to the Harlem Renaissance, including W.E.B. Du Bois and Ethel Waters. Two small hospitals were founded to allow African-American doctors to serve the Black community. Although these buildings have new uses, they, like many others, have a deep connection to Harlem history. Harlem continues to face development pressures that threaten its significant architecture and cultural legacy. Both parts of the proposed historic district were included in the LPC's 1984 study of Harlem and in the Community Board 10 Preservation Report from 2012. We thank the Commission for bringing this district forward and urge a swift vote. We also hope that other districts from those reports will be heard and designated soon. The Conservancy is happy to offer building owners assistance from our technical services and historic properties fund programs. Thank you for the opportunity to present the Conservancy's views.
Great, thank you, Andrea. Next, we'll have Valerie Bradley. And Valerie, I brought you in.
Good morning, Chair Carroll and the LPC commissioners. I'm Valerie Bradley, president of Save Harlem Now. Save Harlem Now strongly supports the Landmark Preservation Commission's designation of the Dorrance Brooks Historic District. We thank the Commission for taking this critical step toward the district designation, for working with the West Harlem Community Preservation Organization during the evaluation process, and for working and for listening to the local property owners and residents associations' unequivocal request to keep the former Mount Calvary United Methodist Church and the adjacent rectory within the proposed district boundary. Like the majority of the local residents, we believe that both Mount Calvary and its former rectory serve as anchors that clearly define the character of the proposed historic district. We are pleased to see them standing today, and we trust that the Commission will work with the Department of Buildings to retain the current stop work order and prevent their demolition. Even in the doomsday scenario in which technicalities or bureaucratic procedures fail to protect these buildings, we are certain that the Commission's enforcement of the landmark laws will yield a contextual infill whose scale and design will be appropriate to the district. Between 2016 and 2017, Save Harlem Now worked with LPC to advance the designation of the historic districts and individual landmarks proposed in the Comprehensive Historic Preservation Plan issued by CB10 in 2012. We were very pleased that our collaboration with LPC led to the designation of the Central Harlem West 130th to 132nd Streets Historic District in 2018. We are equally pleased to see that another of the historic districts proposed in the CB10 preservation plan, the southward extension of the existing St. Nicholas Strivers Row Historic District, has been included within the boundaries of the proposed Dorrance Brooks Historic District. Save Harlem Now shares the residents of Dorrance Brooks' pride and enthusiasm about the first historic district in New York City named in honor of an African American. This is big. The work to acknowledge and protect Harlem's culture and save its historic neighborhoods is more urgent than ever before. Our historic brownstone-lined blocks, majestic houses of worship, and sites of important 20th century African-American cultural and political accomplishment are being targeted one by one for demolition and wholesale redevelopment by real estate interests who are simply changing the quality of life and the character of neighborhoods in our beloved Harlem. Safe Harlem Now looks forward to continuing to work with LPC and our local community partners to designate additional historic districts and individual landmarks throughout CB10 and beyond. To do so will be a win for the city and a win for Harlem, which will retain a voice in determining its future while at the same time honoring its past. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Keith Taylor. Okay, Keith, I've brought you in. And Keith, you just need to unmute yourself and turn on your camera.
Thank you. All right. So I'd like to thank Executive Director Lisa Krasavich, Chair Carroll, and the Landmarks Preservation Commissioners for considering the Dorrance Brooks Historic District proposal. As the president of the Dorrance Brooks Property Owners and Residents Association, I'm proud to have submitted the historic district evaluation on its behalf to the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission for the creation of the Dorrance Brooks Historic District. Our association, along with the community partners and many advocates, including the Historic Districts Council, West Harlem Community Preservation Organization, Save Harlem Now, and many others, are fighting to keep the cultural, artistic, and historical integrity of our neighborhoods intact, and especially to preserve the disappearing history of the struggles and triumphs of the African-American experience in Central Harlem. One of the reasons I'm so proud of this proposal is that it's the first one in New York City history to be named after African-American, a patriot World War I soldier who lost his life fighting for American France, despite the bitter reality of Jim Crow segregation back home. This designation is an enormous step for our goal to strengthen our voice in determining our community's future while honoring its past. We are especially grateful that the boundaries of the proposed historic district include both Mount Calvary United Methodist Church and adjacent rectory, as well as the Grace Congregational Church, both of which were placed on the National Register of Historic Places and included as part of the New York State Dorrance Brooks Historic District designation. By including them in the landmarked historic district proposal, LPC will have input in any future changes, ensuring that they will be contextual with the rest of the district. As Frederick Douglass stated, power concedes nothing without demand. It never did and never will. Find out what any people will quietly submit to, and you will find out the exact measure of injustice and wrong, which can and will be imposed upon them. For the Harlem African-American community, which has lost so much for so long, what little historical legacy remains deserves special consideration to preserve and cherish. There is no question about how strongly this community wishes to preserve the iconic architectural and cultural history left in the village of Harlem, as evidenced in Manhattan Community Board 10 resolutions in October 2018 and 2019, specifically requesting this effort, as well as its April 2012 Central Harlem Historic Preservation Plan requesting the same. Over the past decades, I've watched as developers have demolished historic building after building with no relief in sight and no way to realistically fight for a community the rest of the world celebrates, treasures, and visits, the birthplace of many artistic, educational, military, and political contributions from people of African descent to the rest of humanity, from the Harlem Hellfighters to the Harlem Renaissance, to the Civil Rights Movement, to the Me Too and Black Lives Matter movements happening now. Harlem always has been and will continue to be a mecca for the African diaspora and worthy of preservation for and celebration by future generations, because the best way to honor one's ancestors is by remembering them. This historic landmark designation will allow the village of Harlem to continue to honor its own and for all Americans to celebrate this country's strength through its diversity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, next we have Yuan Chin. Okay, Yuan, just need to, there you go.
Hi, good morning, commissioners. We just got a technical problem. Good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to testify in support of the designation of the Dorrance Brook Square Historic District, a district primarily residential in character with associations to World War I, the Harlem Renaissance, and the Civil Rights Movement. We are also pleased that together the LPC and community have created the first historic district named for an African-American, Dorrance Brooks, a private first class in the 15th Infantry of the 369 Regiment, known as the Harlem Rattlers or Hellfighters, for their fearlessness in battle. 1925 saw the dedication of Dorrance Brook Square, the first park in the city honoring a Black serviceman. 96 years later, in 2021, we stand poised to officially designate the first historic district in Manhattan named for an African-American. It is indeed a special moment for the community, 369th Infantry, and all the Black servicemen who fought so bravely during the First World War for the rights of others, rights not afforded to them back home in the United States. The district also honors the contribution of writers, artists, educators, as mentioned during the presentation, and underscore the rich cultural significance of this area. And I might mention, it was very sad when we lost the home and studio of noted Harlem Renaissance sculptor Augusta Savage during the designation advocacy process. We want to thank Lisa Kersavage and the research team for working with the community to determine the boundaries and advancing the recommendation to the commissioners to include two significant historic properties, the Mount Calvary Church and two adjoining row houses on Edgecombe Avenue within the district. These buildings, situated on the avenue's east side, are visual and architectural anchors and set the tone and character for the proposed district. Edgecombe Avenue showcases the district's development trends, late 19th century row houses, two churches, 6 of the district's apartment buildings, and the square. Not to have included these buildings would potentially allow for the disruption of a consistent street wall and a non-contextual structure adjacent to the historic district. We urge the commissioners to show their support and vote for the first historic district named for an African-American with the proposed boundaries as submitted. It is the right thing to do. Lastly, I want to congratulate the LPC on celebrating the 56th anniversary and commemorating this milestone by acknowledging the contributions of African Americans and preserving significant sites associated with Black history in New York City. Some insist more is required for communities of color to gain equal protection for qualified landmarks comparable to Greenwich Village and elsewhere. We agree that there is much more of significant sites to designate and hope such measures will continue beyond 2021 before it's too late. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of this designation.
Thank you very much. Okay, next we have Tim Anderson, Manhattan Borough President Office.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, Chair Carroll and Commissioners. My name is Tim Anderson. I'm delivering testimony on behalf of Gail Brewer, Manhattan Borough President. I would like to thank the Landmarks Preservation Commission for considering designation of the Dorrance Brook Square Historic District, the first historic district in New York City that would be named after an African American. I'm in full support of this designation and hope many more such districts will be considered in Harlem. I would also like to thank Community Board 10, the Dorrance Brooks Property Owners and Residents Association, the West Harlem Community Preservation Organization, and so many other groups and individuals for their involvement. Together, they advocated to have this area designated as a historic district. The area defined by the proposed Dorrance Brook Square Historic District has flourished for decades and played a pivotal role in encouraging and celebrating African-American home ownership and community. This designation further highlights the achievements of Dorrance Brooks, a soldier and native of Harlem who died fighting in the First World War. Dorrance Brook Square was dedicated in his memory after the end of the war, which coincided with the Harlem Renaissance. By designating the historic district, we continue to honor his legacy. In February 2021, I sent a letter to the Landmarks Preservation Commission stressing the importance of preserving Mount Calvary United Methodist Church at 116 Edgecombe Avenue and the adjacent row houses at 112 and 114 Edgecombe Avenue. These sites are currently included within the boundaries of the proposed historic district. Unfortunately, in the interim, the owners of these properties obtained demolition permits. I strongly urge the commission to keep these sites in the proposed historic district to ensure their preservation. I want to stress the importance of this designation while also noting the need for LPC to look at further landmarking opportunities in Upper Manhattan. There are more sites to be considered. We are at risk of losing our history if we continue to demolish and neglect buildings that have such important ties to New York City and Harlem community. I look forward to further dialogue with LPC, Community Board 10, and others as we continue to identify historic sites in Upper Manhattan and ensure that we recognize the contributions of all communities. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Great, thank you very much. And I'm still working off of the sign-in sheet. So next I'm going to call Simeon Bankoff. And while I'm doing that, I just want to remind people that if you'd like to speak, please do raise your hand. Okay, Simeon, there you go.
Good morning, Commissioners. Simeon Bankoff, Historic Districts Council. The Historic Districts Council is the citywide advocate for New York's historic neighborhoods. We've long been interested in extending landmark protections to neighborhoods in Upper Manhattan and had consulted with Community Board 10 over a decade ago when they were formulating their preservation plan. We're very pleased to see the plan has achieved some success in seeding the ground for preservation efforts in the area and are immensely pleased the Landmarks Commission is holding this hearing today. The proposed Dorrance Brook Square Historic District has many parents, several longtime preservation advocates, and more recently involved community activists and residents have been instrumental in bringing this effort forward. This would not have happened without the efforts of Michael Adams, Angel Leon, Valerie Bradley, Ewan Chin, the Dorrance Brook Square Property Owners and Residents Association, Save Harlem Now, Keith Taylor, West Harlem Community Preservation Organization, to list but some of the key players alphabetically. Special thanks also to Marissa Marvelli for drafting the neighborhood's nomination to the State National Register and to all the elected officials who have been so supportive over the course of this campaign. This Harlem neighborhood is both architecturally remarkable and redolent with history, built beginning in the very late 19th century for upper middle class professionals. It takes its name from Dorrance Brooks, a Black American soldier killed in World War I. Despite their presence in the city since its inception, There are few places in New York City named for Black New Yorkers, and even less which have had those names for almost a century. The area attracted a diverse population over the decades with a number of standout historic and artistic personalities who helped change our country. Few more so than Shirley Chisholm. The first Black woman elected to Congress, Brooklyn-based Chisholm became involved in childhood education in this neighborhood, working in educational programs at Mount Calvary United Methodist Church at 118 Edgecombe Avenue. This was the beginning of her career in children's education, a career which eventually propelled her to serve in Congress and run for president, another first. HDC applauds the Landmarks Commission for including 118 Edgecombe Avenue within the boundaries of this historic district. We understand the extenuating circumstances of the intended demolition hanging over the site, but feel strongly that those permits do not negate the site's historic significance. We also hold out hope that a solution can be discovered which will save this beautiful structure and find solace in the knowledge that the Landmarks Commission will at the very least be able to guide whatever development replaces this church into a form which complements the surroundings historic neighborhood. This historic district is also significant as a test case for the Landmarks Commission's recently launched equity framework. Although the LPC has a good, if often overlooked, history of identifying and protecting sites of cultural significance, more can always be done, and the framework sets out to encourage such actions. By inclusively including 118 Edgecombe Avenue into the Dorrance Brooks Square Historic District, the LPC is taking a strong stance that this framework has real meaning. HDC encourages this action and looks forward to working with the Landmarks Commission to bring forward more sites of significance to be acknowledged and protected, both in Upper Manhattan and elsewhere. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Next, we have somebody from the sign-in sheet, Javier Martinez. Javier, I just brought you in. And Javier, you just need to unmute yourself, turn on your camera.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Please just state your name for the record. Yes, we can. Please just state your name for the record.
Sure. It's Javier Martinez, and I'm the owner of Artifact. So I am a Harlem-based developer, and I focus primarily on preserving and redeveloping historic buildings in Harlem. I am the owner, or one of the owners of the properties located at 112 and 116 Edgecombe Avenue, which are located on the northwest edge of the proposed district. While we're in favor of the district designation proceeding, we request that our properties be excluded from the district. We submitted an application to the Department of City Planning to rezone our properties and add additional residential square footage, establishing the properties as a mandatory inclusionary housing area and including a brand new fresh food store at the street level. This proposal has been in development since 2017 and would facilitate the development of a mixed-use property with 75 new dwelling units, of which 19 or 25% of all dwelling units would be permanently affordable at a low affordability level. This project was on track to enter the public review process in 2020. However, it was delayed as a result of COVID, but we are definitely moving forward full steam ahead with the development. Contrary to what was mentioned earlier, we had actually pulled the permits for the former church at 116 long before we had any awareness of a possible designation, and even before the National Historic Register designation came to be. So that you have a little bit of a history, the church was deconsecrated prior to us purchasing it, and the congregation used the capital to renovate the adjacent St. Mark's Church, which was in heavy disrepair. The congregation merged with another nearby congregation and chose St. Mark's over 116 as their permanent home. And we also have approved demolition plans for 112 and 114 Edgecombe with permits already in process. These were also in process long before the designation came under active consideration. Designation of these properties would force us to abandon the rezoning, and the property would still be demolished, mainly 116 Edgecombe, ending up with a possible vacant lot for a significant period of time while we get through the additional approval process. We will still end up building a new building in that lot, in those lots, but it'll likely be a 50-unit building as opposed to 75, with no affordable housing or fresh, which are important to the community. These properties are not integral to the Dorrance Dorrance Brook district, as it's located on the corner of the proposed district boundaries and does not compromise the district if excluded. While we are big proponents of historic preservation, including these properties in the district will make it untenable to proceed with the proposed rezoning, and would deprive this community from receiving the much needed benefits of new affordable housing and a fresh store that would increase access to fresh produce and nutritious foods, as well as create local jobs. Please do not include us in the district. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, next I'm going to call Malcolm Barksdale. Okay, Malcolm Barksdale, you just need to unmute yourself. Show on your camera.
Good morning, Madam Chair and Commissioners. I speak for myself as well as the Emanuel Peterson Historical Society, and we join in supporting the proposal for the proposed historic district of the Dorrance Brook Square. The only reservation that I have is with respect to a boundary line in Block 2023, which includes the north side of West 137th Street and the south side of West 138th Street. There is a courtyard. As drawn, the boundaries would include two historic districts within a small space of a single courtyard. And we would prefer that the courtyard be included in one historic district or the other, as opposed to both historic districts. Otherwise, we completely support the proposal.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, next, Christabel Goff. And Christabel, I've brought you in. Okay, Christabel, I'm just going to ask you to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Oh, excellent. I'm sorry for the technical difficulties, which seem to be affecting everyone today. This is Christabel Goff speaking for the Society for the Architecture of the City. We wanted to add our voice to the many others welcoming this proposal for a Dorrance Brook Square Historic District with the original boundaries, which would preserve its still living character in a Harlem that has become legendary all over the world, not only for its architecture, but not least for its literary associations, its music, sacred and profane, such unique painters as Jacob Lawrence, for its political influence, Du Bois lived in this district, and for the courage of many upholding constitutionally guaranteed civil rights through many difficult trials. The district, through its nomenclature, also memorializes aspects of military history and the all too recent struggle for recognition of military achievements by people of color in a segregated army. The visual charm of these streets, the churches, the green space, the dignified rows of turn-of-the-century row houses, needs to be kept intact under the guidance of this commission. We hope the commission will act promptly to preserve this district, which is emblematic of a national concern. This is a racial justice issue for the world of historic preservation. Dorrance Brooks is a step in the direction of landmark parity for the beautiful historic streets of Harlem, when so many equivalent parts of Lower Manhattan have long been protected by landmark designation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, I'm going to call Michael Henry Adams. And just a reminder to everybody, if you would like to speak, please do raise your hand. Okay, Michael, I've brought you in. And Michael, just need to unmute yourself.
Yeah. Thank you. Do you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, splendid. Good morning, commissioners. I'm here joining with others to again express this idea of being pleased that the Harlem community has been able to work with the Landmarks Preservation Commission for us to bring together this historic district. But joining on to what Christabel Goff just said about parity, this is a nice stop, a nice beginning. But when one considers the 80% of Greenwich Village that's protected by landmarking, when one considers the designation of the house on Duffield Street, but not the house on Riverside Drive, we really have such a long, long way to go in terms of parity. And I suppose that the thing that is so troubling for African Americans when we hear about people wanting to affect racial justice is that the injustice has put us so far behind that, you know, it just occurred to me this morning, no matter how much my descendants might receive by way of reparations someday, it will never be equal to the wealth that the plantation owner enjoyed and was able to pass on to his descendants. And so it is with landmarking. In places like Harlem, we're so far behind other communities, and not because we have any less by way of an architectural legacy of remarkable buildings, certainly no less than those that exist in Greenwich Village or in Tribeca or in Park Slope. But in terms of protection, we have almost nothing compared to those other communities. That's changed with this, or will change with this designation, but it won't change enough. It won't change enough. We don't even know whether it will change enough for us to save these two churches that are under threat. And every church in Harlem that exists is under threat. And in the past 10 years, there have been something like 20 of them that have come down, 20 churches of architectural, historical, and cultural significance. And this is a terrible thing, and it needn't be, and can only be remedied with the Landmarks Commission, and remedied with the commission appreciating that it's because of their lack of involvement of communities of color in the past that so many of these buildings, they look askance at and say that they are not intact enough, that the commission themselves are responsible for these buildings not being intact now. And in the same way that that designation has been used in the past to bring about restoration at Sylvan Terrace and also at Strivers Row, that it can be employed to bring about restoration more broadly throughout Harlem and other communities of color. And that's what we look forward to with the designation of this particular district. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Avra Rice. Okay, let's see. Ava, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning, Chair Carroll and Commissioners. I would like to thank the Landmarks Preservation Committee for this public hearing regarding the Dorrance Square Historic District. I am Arva Rice. I'm President and CEO of the New York Urban League. We are currently slated to be part of the Historic District. Our building is at 204 West 136th Street. I am speaking today to register my philosophical support for the designation of a historic neighborhood in Harlem. I also want to state my concerns about the unique set of challenges and opportunities that uptown nonprofits and churches face. I recognize that the proposed Dorrance Brook Square Historic District is monumental for Harlem. This area has been home for the New York Urban League for more than 80 years. We have helped people find jobs, get student scholarships, train community members to use mainframes, computers, and introduce them to the internet. During the Great Depression, we provided haircuts as well as food and jobs. This area has churches, community centers, and people who have shaped this great neighborhood, and it deserves to be preserved and its story told. But there is another part of Harlem's history, and I know it is not news to those who are gathered here today. Harlem's history is one of underinvestment, lack of access to capital, and a dearth of city resources, from sanitation to appropriate policing to pest control. Through these challenges, my neighbors have stood for and stood up for this historic neighborhood, making improvements and fixing properties without home improvement loans or capital resources. So I stand before you today imploring the commission and our elected officials to invest in the district as well as name the district. As a result of unforeseen circumstances, the New York Urban League was not notified about its placement into this project. Our story is not a unique one. Care and upkeep of the building, coupled with massive water damage, left us out of our space for an extended period of time. Now we are preparing to move back into our brownstones and have been notified that there may be additional requirements and fundraising required for a smooth transition. I can personally attest that maintenance of old buildings is costly. Providing a list of grant opportunities is not enough for many of the capacity-starved organizations in Harlem that cannot afford grant writers or bank loans. I'm aware that the designation of this district has required months and indeed years of planning. It is my hope that the commitment to the historic district designation is maintained when the designation is completed and beyond. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to continued dialogue with the commission.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, next we have Friends of the Upper East Side. And I just want to remind people that you can only speak once for testimony. So Valerie, I know we heard from you, so I'm going to lower your hand. But if anybody else would like to speak, please do raise your hand. Okay, Friends.
Hi, can I be heard?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, this is Laura Variali representing Friends of the Upper East Side Historic Districts. Friends is pleased to see the consideration given to this highly significant neighborhood in Harlem. We are aware that the percentage of landmark properties in Manhattan exceeds the percentage of other boroughs in the city. However, there are many areas that are currently unrecognized. Harlem is one of those areas. With an incredibly rich cultural history, the neighborhood played a very important part in African American history in New York and should be recognized as such. While we appreciate the architectural integrity of the proposed Dorrance Brook Square Historic District, we believe this aspect to be secondary if compared with the cultural and social significance of the area. Friends is happy to see that this angle has been thoroughly researched and hope that it will be highlighted on the designation report and drive the Commission's decision whenever an alteration proposal comes forward. We fully support this designation and hope that it serves as a catalyst to the recognition of culturally significant areas in the city, despite their level of integrity. Additionally, Friends fully support the designation to be heard later of the Harlem branch of the New York Public Library. We're pleased to see that this wonderful building will join the list of individual landmark Carnegie libraries. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. And I don't see any other hands raised, but I do want to make sure everybody has the opportunity to speak. So please do raise your hand. Here we go. Okay, Rosalind Graves Wilson, I'm going to bring you in. Okay, I've brought you in. You just need to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I was not planning to speak today. My name is Rosalind Graves Wilson. I am within the historic district, but I do want to speak about the church on 140th and Edgecombe, where they're planning, where they would like to put a supermarket. And I want to say that Edgecombe has one lane in each direction, and a school right across the street from where they're thinking about putting a supermarket. And that area is just not meant for that kind of traffic, to have trucks that would have to deliver food and come in and out, and to have the children running around. So I'm just saying that I feel the church, whether or not it could be included in the historic district, we don't need a supermarket there. And that's not one of the reasons that they should not be included. And we have a supermarket just 1 block away that was put up maybe 5-6 years ago. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, with that, I don't see any other hands raised. So I think that's the end of the testimony.
Great, thank you so much. And I want to thank everyone who came and spoke today. This has, been another great experience since I've been under my tenure as both executive director and as chair. We've been working closely with the Community Board 10 plan, and I'm really excited that we're at this point in the process for the Dorrance Brooks Square Historic District. And I am looking forward to continuing to work with Community Board 10, Save Harlem Now, and other neighborhood advocates as we recognize the important history in Harlem and Upper Manhattan. So thank you all for testifying today. And as I said before, we will close the hearing today, and we will schedule a public meeting in the near future when we will come back and address additional research that we've done and issues raised in the testimony and schedule a vote. So with that, commissioners, I'm going to start to unmute you so we can make a motion to close the hearing. And Commissioner Holford-Smith, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Okay, and Commissioner Shamir Barron, would you second that motion?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the hearing is closed, and thank you again for coming to speak today, and we'll see you all in the near future, and we'll let everybody know when our public meeting will be scheduled. So with that, we're going to move to our next research item, and I'll turn it back over to Kate to take us, oh, no, I'm sorry, I'm turning it over to Tim Fry, our Director of Special Projects and Strategic Planning, who will walk us through the presentation for our next item.
Good morning, commissioners. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Just checking. Okay, thanks. The item before you is the New York Public Library Harlem branch at 9 West 124th Street in the borough of Manhattan. There we are. The New York Public Library Harlem branch is one of 67 circulating libraries constructed with funding from industrialist Andrew Carnegie in the early 20th century for the city's 3 library systems, and is one of 12 Carnegie branches designed for the New York Public Library by the prominent firm of McKim, Mead & White. Since its completion in 1909, the library has served as a space for cultural and civic engagement, and in the 1930s contributed to the development of community theater in Harlem, when it was the home of the Rose McClendon Players and Theater Workshop. Located on West 124th Street in South Central Harlem, the library is across from Marcus Garvey Park and near the designated Mount Morris Park Historic District and Extension. The Harlem branch can trace its origins to the Harlem Library, established as a privately operated subscription library in 1825, when Harlem was an isolated village then centered around 3rd Avenue. In the late 19th century, as development spread westward, the trustees of the Harlem Library purchased the lot and erected a new building on West 123rd Street, shown here on the left, that housed both the library and income-producing apartments above. The building is within the Mount Morris Historic District. In 1903, the Harlem Library, which had become a free circulating library in 1897, joined the New York Public Library's recently established circulating branch system. In 1906, the New York Public Library Site Selection Committee purchased the site at West 124th Street, and in January 1909, the Harlem branch, shown on the right here in this photo, opened in its new location with room for more books and services. The Harlem branch reflects the history of 20th century Harlem and its changing demographics. When it first opened, the area around what is known as now as Marcus Garvey Park had a predominantly white population, including many European immigrants. Following World War I and the geopolitical changes in Europe, additional immigrants from Northern Europe appear in the census rolls, and the branch was the repository of the public library's circulating collection of books in Finnish. By the mid-1930s, Harlem's growing Black community expanded into South Central Harlem, and the Harlem branch refocused its services and programs to meet their needs. As a civic space, the library served an important role in fostering the Black cultural life of Harlem, especially in the 1930s and early 1940s, serving briefly as the home of the Rose McClendon Players and Workshop Theater, and then as the temporary home of the renowned Schomburg Collection during the collection's enlargement of its facility on 135th Street. The Rose McClendon Players and Workshop Theater was established in 1938 by Dick Campbell, his wife actress Muriel Ron, and George Norford, who were motivated by the growing satisfaction with the types of opportunities and roles available to Black actors on Broadway. The following year, the company began its short residence in the Harlem branch, where it offered theatrical training and a full season of plays by African-American playwrights. Among the company's alumni was the actor, director, activist, Ossie Davis, who referred to the library as the only home I ever had, the very temple of my existence, my craft, the place that trained me, the first institution to welcome me. The Harlem branch has continued to serve the needs of community residents, providing access to print and electronic resources, as well as a range of programs, including exhibits, musical events, literary discussions, and vocational training. After a renovation completed in 2004, the Harlem branch broadened its services with a new auditorium and a dedicated literacy center. The Harlem branch is one of 5 Carnegie libraries in Harlem, each designed by McKim, Mead & White. And from left to right, we have the 135th Street branch, now the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, the 125th Street branch, the Harry Belafonte 105th Street branch, and the Hamilton Grange branch on 145th Street, all of which are New York City designated New York City landmarks. Under the careful stewardship of the New York Public Library, the Harlem branch's building has changed little over time. The classically influenced limestone facade is raised on a low granite base, and more recent work included sensitive alterations to the exterior, such as the replacement of the entrance door and windows to reflect the original design. Made possible by a grant from Andrew Carnegie, the New York Public Library's Harlem branch has served the residents of South Central Harlem neighborhood for more than a century. Throughout its history, the branch has served as a space for educational and cultural enrichment in the form of lectures, exhibits, classes, and live performances, such as those presented by the Rose McClendon Players and Theater and Workshop Theater. Designed by the prominent firm of McKim, Mead & White, the classical revival style Harlem branch with its elegant limestone facade featuring subtle classical decorative elements is an outstanding example of the firm's work for the New York Public Library system. And this concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Tim. Commissioners, do we have any questions on this item? All right. Okay, then I think we will move to public testimony. And again, I will turn it over to Lisa Krasavich to take us through the speakers. If you're in the meeting and would like to speak on this item, please raise your hand so we can identify you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Lisa.
Okay. So again, please do raise your hands. If you'd like to speak, I'm going to start with George Mahalsis from the New York Public Library. Okay, George, you just need to unmute yourself.
If you're in the meeting and would like to speak on this item, please raise your hand so we can identify. And with that, I'll turn it over to Lisa.
And I think we might have YouTube playing. There we go.
Yeah. There are. This is George here, from New York Public Library. George Mahalsis. Not sure if you can hear me, but there are some technical difficulties. There's a delay in the transmission. So let me know if I should begin.
Yes, we can hear you perfectly well. So there was a little bit of background noise from our hearing, but I think we're good. And please just go ahead.
There we go.
Lisa, maybe we tell him to mute the YouTube video. He might have both running.
George, do you have YouTube running, or are you hearing this on Zoom? Can you mute?
Background noise from our hearing, but I think we're good.
Okay.
And, please just go ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm George Mahalsis, Vice President for Government and Community Affairs at the New York Public Library. I want to thank you for inviting us to speak about the historical significance of our Harlem branch, which is currently under landmark consideration. The New York Public Library supports this important designation as it strongly upholds the branch's strong presence in the community and honors its 100 years of service to New Yorkers. The Harlem Library is one of 67 circulating libraries constructed in New York City during the early 20th century with funding from philanthropist Andrew Carnegie. The branch, located on West 124th Street across from Marcus Garvey Park, has served the residents of its South Central Harlem neighborhood since its opening in 1909. And for over 110 years, it has welcomed New Yorkers of all ages and backgrounds, honoring its mission to be the people's university and providing patrons with free access to books and computers, alongside wide-ranging programs that provide educational and cultural enrichment, reflecting the community's identity throughout its history. The branch has been a vital and supportive presence in the heart of Black Harlem since the 1930s, as noted by celebrated actor and playwright Ossie Davis, who once referred to the branch as the only home I had. He was a member of the Rose McClendon Players Workshop, which made its home at the Harlem Library. The New York Public Library considers our Carnegie Libraries to be a true and vital link to our past, present, and future, a treasured gift for their communities and one that all New Yorkers can enjoy. Thank you again for allowing us to share the history and impact of the Harlem Library. Not only does the branch bear the name of the neighborhood it so proudly serves, it represents the opportunities available to every patron who has walked through its doors and dared to dream. And we greatly appreciate your time and consideration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for putting up with our technical issues. Okay, so next I'm going to call Tim Anderson.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair Carroll and Commissioners. My name is Tim Anderson. I'm delivering testimony on behalf of Gail Brewer, Manhattan Borough President. I'm in full support of the New York Library Harlem branch library for designation as a landmark. It is my hope that the Harlem Library, along with the proposed Square Historic District, are the beginning of a broader effort to designate landmarks in Harlem and in Upper Manhattan. Sitting in the shadows of Marcus Garvey Park, the Harlem Library has been a destination of learning for generations. With its striking facade and interior designed by McKim, Mead, and White, the library has always been thought of as a physical and cultural landmark by Harlem residents. The library continues to provide education and cultural opportunities for its patrons, even during the ongoing pandemic. As a landmark, this beautiful building would ensure that it remains a resource and an example of civic pride for years to come. As we continue to navigate the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic, our educational and cultural institutions will play a pivotal role in revitalizing our communities. The Harlem Library has changed with the times, but has always been an anchor for the community. I join the residents of Harlem in celebrating this potential designation and look forward to our future discussions about other landmarking opportunities in Upper Manhattan. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, next we have Madeline Stokely. Or Stockley.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Commissioners, for giving me this opportunity to speak in support of the landmark designation for the 125th Street Harlem Library. I represent MMPCIA as its president. That's the Mount Morris Park Community Improvement Association. I also represent some of our elders. I represent the Mount Morris Park Rehabilitation Committee, an outgrowth of the Mount Morris Park Improvement Committee, which held its first official meeting in the home of Ellie Guggenheimer to discuss the renovation of Marcus Garvey Park, at that time known as Mount Morris Park. This group was led by my mother, Hilda Stokely, Helen Bowman, Reverend Adair, and many from the community, and held its first meeting on September the 26th, 1963, as they began the movement to provide a quality park for the community. I recently reread some of the meeting notes, and it was clear that the close proximity of the library to the park played a critical role in enhancing the cultural activities in the community. While the architectural value of the building is without question and surely one to be preserved, I will bring our attention to the cultural significance and to what went on in the building for the children who grew up in the community like myself, who began to understand the significance of our historical contributions as Black Americans to this country. It was often through attending the wonderful programs at the 124th Street Harlem Library. Excuse me. As a child, I and my classmates had little appreciation for the greatness of who we were and what we were being brought to when we were brought to the library to hear Langston Hughes give us a private reading of his poetry, or to see a play or to enjoy a story about people who looked like us and helped us to understand our greatness from whence we came. It was just the other day that I engaged in a conversation with a friend who's my age, who we are now both well in our senior years, who had heartwarming memories of the programs in this beautiful building. As the Black cultural and political movements of the 60s and 70s flourished, it was that building, that library, where we often saw actors and playwrights, Black playwrights, who were presenting the wonderfulness of the Black experience. I can just only imagine Ossie Davis, Ruby Deeds, and others after rehearsal going over to Lennox Lounge to continue political discussions or just to relax, to have a drink. We've lost the marquee of the Lennox Lounge and the beautiful interior, and we hope that we will not continue to lose our history. In the 70s, my mother, along with many others, were involved in the rehabilitation of the park. It was successful. Mount Morris Park then became a landmark designation at a time when very few areas in Harlem were given that designation. The 124th Street Library is a logical inclusion in the Mount Morris Park Historic District. And as is the fire tower was designated not as part of that historic district. I wish I could ask my mother why the library was not included at that time, but knowing her as I do and knowing her comrades who were in the struggle, I'm sure that there was a very strong reason why they weren't able to get that included. But I'm sure now she and her comrades would be very, very pleased to have the library included in the historic district. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Okay, next we have Angel Ion.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great, thanks. Good morning, Chair Carroll and LPC commissioners. My name is Angel Ion. I'm Vice President of Save Harlem Now, a membership not-for-profit organization dedicated to protecting, preserving, and celebrating Harlem's irreplaceable built heritage. Save Harlem Now is delighted to submit this testimony in support of the designation of the New York Public Library Harlem branch. The Harlem community has 5 branches of the New York Public Library. They opened between 1904 and 1909, and each was designed by the renowned firm of McKee, Mead & White. Classic revival in style and build of limestone, the 5 McKee, Mead & White designs are similar in appearance, but each has its own personality and unique features. 4 of the libraries have been designated New York City landmarks. Now is the time to designate the 5th one. The New York Public Library is the nation's largest public library system, and it has been an essential provider of free books, information, ideas, and education since 1895. The Harlem branch of the New York Public Library, sited on West 124th Street, across the street from Marcus Garvey Park, and adjacent to the Mount Morris Park Historic District and Extension, is at the heart of the vibrant and historic Harlem neighborhood. The Harlem branch has been serving the community since its opening in 1909, shifting from a largely white population in the early 1900s to a community of immigrants from Scandinavian and European Europe and Eastern European after World War I to an African-American community beginning in the Harlem Renaissance in the 1920s and continuing for the century. This library is has a remarkable history as a civic center for the African-American community, including hosting the groundbreaking Rose McClendon Playwrights Theater Group that nurtured many Black actors and playwrights for decades. In addition to traditional library services, the Harlem branch has been a focus of educational innovation and service, providing exhibition and performance space, a literacy center, and vocational trainings. It is a vital community hub that provides far more than just access to free books and materials. More than a century later, the Harlem branch continues Arne Carnegie's vision of libraries as temples of learning, ambition, and aspiration for towns and cities throughout the United States. Save Harlem Now is pleased that one of the properties recommended in the Community Board 10 Preservation Plan has finally been considered for designation. We look forward to continuing to work with the Landmarks Preservation Commission to advance the designation of other individual landmarks included in the CB10 Preservation Plan. We urge the Landmarks Commission to designate the Harlem branch of the New York Public Library System as an individual landmark today. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much. Next we have Todd Stevens.
Yes, am I on?
Yes, you're on.
Okay, great. My name is Todd Stevens, and I put something small together, but basically I am really in support of landmarking this structure. I've worked and lived within a few blocks of this library for the past 20 years. I'm a co-founder of our West 124th Street Block Association that supports unity amongst our residents, businesses, and nonprofits along 124th Street. I'm also an MMPCA board member. The library in particular has been a core location for community gatherings, from Mount Morris talks, police discussions, and most important to my family, a place where parents and young children have gathered for story time a couple times a week before COVID for a large number of years. We look forward to this also returning after COVID. As far as its architecture, any building that's a McKim, Mead, and White building should be landmarked. The library specifically, it rests between a condominium building, 2002 Fifth Avenue, that was built about 15 years ago, and the Handmaids of Mary building, which that building in particular will look much different than it does today. With that building being vulnerable to look different than what it is today, it brings such great value for our Landmarks Commission to landmark this building, make this official, so that when we're walking through Marcus Garvey Park and we're looking at the cherry blossoms, that we're always seeing something of pre-war and something of history as we're walking around in our neighborhood. The West 124th Street Block Association supports this. I support this. I'm thankful to see Madeline Stokely, our MMPCA board president, on this Zoom. And I really do appreciate everything the Landmarks Commission is doing to make sure that this library lives on forever. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, and next we have Diego Roballo.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. My name is Diego Roballo. I work for the Historic Districts Council. The Historic Districts Council is the citywide advocate for New York's historic buildings and neighborhoods. HDC has long been interested in preserving New York City's remarkable collection of public buildings, especially its libraries and schools. Often the grandest structure in its immediate area, New York City's historic libraries and school buildings announce the importance of their uplifting societal mission through architecture. Catering especially to children and people seeking knowledge, these public buildings played outsized roles in their communities. So we are pleased to support the designation of New York Public Library, Harlem branch, located at 9 West 124th Street, as an individual landmark of New York City. The Harlem branch of the New York Public Library is one of the 67 branches across New York City built with funding from industrialist and philanthropist Andrew Carnegie. 5 of these Carnegie-funded libraries were built in Harlem, and the Harlem branch, located at 9 West 124th Street, is the only one that has not yet been designated a New York City landmark. HDC is pleased that this building is currently being reviewed, as its architectural integrity and relevance to the history of Harlem are just as meritorious as its counterparts in the same neighborhood. As a free circulating library, the Harlem branch of the New York Public Library, built in 1909 and designed by McKim, Mead, and White, has contributed to the intellectual advancement of the many communities that have lived in Harlem since the building was completed. As an example of the service which the library provided and its importance to the neighborhood, noted actor, director, writer, and activist Ossie Davis said of this building, "This was the only home that I had, the very temple of my existence, my craft, the place that trained me, the first institution to welcome me." As someone who received the National Medal of the Arts and a Kennedy Center honor, as well as being inducted into the American Theater Hall of Fame, this is a very high praise. Besides the clear cultural contributions of this building, HDC thanks LPC for acknowledging the architectural virtue of this structure. With its limestone facade on a low granite base with large recessed arched openings on the first 2 stories and flathead windows with simple surrounds in the 3rd story, this building will be a strong addition to the ranks of New York City's landmarks. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And Andrea Goldwyn is next.
Thanks, Lisa. Good morning, Chair Carroll and Commissioners. I'm Andrea Goldwyn speaking on behalf of the New York Landmarks Conservancy. The Conservancy is pleased to support designation of the New York Public Library's Harlem branch as an individual landmark. This library is one of 67 Carnegie libraries in New York, and it's one of 12 that McKim, Mead & White designed. That alone is enough to merit designation. In addition, this lovely low-scale classical revival style building features an austere limestone facade with arched windows and pilasters and maintains much historic integrity. Modifications include an ADA accessible ramp and associated changes to the stoop, which do not detract from the building's appearance. The library has been the center of Harlem cultural life for decades and continues to play an important role in the community. With a prominent location facing Mount Morris Park, this is a neighborhood landmark that should receive this formal recognition. We thank you for bringing this designation forward and thank you for the opportunity to express the Conservancy's views.
Okay, thank you very much. And we have Chloe Stevens next.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, hi, I'm Rachel Stevens. Chloe's my daughter. This is logged in for her preschool Zoom. My husband, Todd Stevens, actually just spoke, and he had brought mention to how our family really enjoys the story time at the library. I'm a stay-at-home mom here in the community, and it's a really special experience going to the Harlem Branch Library because it's right across the street from Marcus Garvey Park. So there's a lot of interaction between the library and the park, and it's a really beautiful thing. The story time in particular is special because it's a very multi-generational and international experience with childcare workers from all around the world and grandmothers, aunts, uncles. It's a really special experience and way to get to know each other. And it's just such a place of joy in our life and in the community. And I really just wanted to put my 2 cents in as a mom in the community. And that's why I support this measure.
Great, thank you very much. And with that, I don't see any other testimony or anybody else with their hands raised, excuse me. I think that's the end of the testimony.
All right, great, thank you. It's really wonderful to be doing this work and to have so many people participate in our hearing and supporting this work. So again, I want to thank everyone who spoke today, and most importantly, I want to thank the library for your support and your partnership on all of the libraries that we work together on. So thank you for that. So commissioners, I'm going to start to unmute you all so that we can move to close the hearing. And again, we will go through the testimony and schedule a public meeting in the near future when we can discuss the latest research, testimony, and schedule a vote. So Commissioner Bland, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Thank you. Commissioner Lutfi, would you second that motion?
Oh, can you hear? Second.
Yes. Thank you. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so the hearing is closed, and we will schedule a public meeting for this item again in the near future, and looking forward to that time. Thank you all again for participating today. And now we will move to our public hearing agenda for applications for work on designated properties, and I'll turn it over to Corey Harala, our Director of Preservation. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Sarah, and good morning, everyone. We may pause for just a few seconds to switch teams. And just a reminder to upcoming applicants that we are about 30 minutes or so behind schedule due to some earlier technical difficulties. and lunchtime may be adjusted accordingly. And with that, I see the presentation, so we'll go ahead and read that in. Preservation public hearing item number 1, LPC 21-05846, an application for a certificate of appropriateness, number of Queens, block 10289, lot 51. This is 173-02 113th Avenue in the Addisleigh Park Historic District. A medieval revival style freestanding house with attached garage built in 1935 to 37. And the application is to install a fence.
Okay, commissioners, the applicants have entered the hearing and the staff will be giving the presentation. So with that, Dina, you have control of the presentation and you may proceed.
Great, thank you, Abby. Good morning, commissioners. Dina Tass-Winter, preservation staff. The item before you is 17302 113th Avenue, a freestanding house with attached garage located in the Addisleigh Park Historic District. The proposal is to remove a chain link fence and install a PVC fence at the same location at the side/rear yard. The subject property is located here on a corner lot at the edge of the district. These are the 1940s and 80s tax photographs. And these designation photos from 2011 illustrate the visibility of the proposed fence. As you turn the corner onto Marnie Place, the existing chain link fence comes into view beyond the garage structure, as you can see in the right photograph here. And here you can see the full width of the side yard and the relationship of the existing fence to the garage, the driveway, and to the sidewalk. The existing conditions today are much the same as at time of designation. And the owner has sketched this site plan, which shows the full siting of the proposed fence to replace the chain link fence in its existing location. You'll note that there's about a 3.5-foot swath of grass between the edge of the fence and the sidewalk. These Google Street View screenshots are to again illustrate the experience of viewing this fence from the street and to show that a solid PVC fence with a white finish is already present at the yard behind this one, and the proposed fence will abut that fence and meet its height. Commissioners will also note that a variety of fence types and materials, including metal, wood, and PVC, are present throughout this district. And the majority of those are modern insertions, but they were installed prior to designation of the district. The owner is proposing a 6-foot tall solid PVC fence with a dark brown finish to match the wood framing of the house. This is the specification sheet from the manufacturer, and highlighted here is the proposed finish color. The owner is here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dina. Commissioners, do we have any questions for the owner or for Dina? Yes, Commissioner Devonshire, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I'm sorry if I didn't get it. How tall was the extant fence?
I believe it's somewhere between 4 and 5 feet tall, but if the owner has more specifics that he would like to say about it, he may.
Hello, hi, how are you guys?
Good, how are you?
Can you hear me?
Please, yes, and if you could state your name for the record, that would be great.
Albert Maxwell, 17302 113th Ave, Jamaica, New York.
Okay, great. Okay. Do you want to respond? Yeah.
Was he asking the fence that's there now or the neighbor's fence?
The height of the fence that's there now, but
excuse me? It's 4 feet.
Fence that is there now. How tall is it?
It's 4 feet.
Great. If you have the information about the adjacent fence, that could also be helpful for our evaluation.
The neighbor's fence is a PVC white fence, and it's 6 feet in height.
Okay. All right. Other questions, commissioners? All right. And thank you, Dina. I think you've flipped the slide so that the neighbor's fence was also visible in the photos. Okay, so I don't see any questions at this time, so we will move to public testimony and we may have questions afterward. So if you're in the meeting and would like to speak on this item, please raise your virtual hand so we can identify you. And we'll start with anyone who signed up in advance. And I'm going to turn it over to Lisa Kersavage to take us through the speakers.
Okay, we had one person to speak. That's Simeon Bankoff, who I've already brought in.
Good morning, commissioners. Simeon Bankoff, Historic Districts Council. HDC is proud to have contributed to the designation of the Addisleigh Park Historic District by sponsoring surveys of the area and working with community stakeholders over several years during the process. While the neighborhood is known for its famous residents and important role in advancing social and racial equality under the law, its primary physical characteristic has always been its suburban, garden-like atmosphere. This characteristic is one of the selling points that drew New Yorkers to the edge of the city. It allowed for a more countrified lifestyle while still being reasonably accessible to Manhattan's urban environment. In this sense, Addisleigh Park has much in common with its contemporary railroad suburbs scattered throughout the boroughs and beyond. In these districts, which are often planned or semi-planned communities, like Addisleigh Park, fences and walls were and are a major design feature of the visual environment, often in their consistent absence. Fences such as the one proposed would be completely out of place in Prospect Park South, Fieldston, or Douglaston, to name just three similar neighborhoods which are also designated historic districts. It's completely out of place here. In addition to closing off the property in an uncharacteristic way for the neighborhood, the material proposed for the fence is completely inappropriate for a designated historic district. HDC suggests that if a visual barrier is desired for this property, the applicant should do the historically appropriate thing and plant a hedge.
Great, thank you. Don't see any other people here to testify.
Okay, thank you. And Rich, do we have any written testimony?
We no additional testimony.
Okay, thanks. All right, Mr. Maxwell, would you like to respond to the comments?
Yes. We had hedges for the lifespan of the house, and I live directly across the street from a park that does not clean up its leaves. So for years, we're talking over 40 years, it has been a complete nuisance to us because all of the park's leaves come into our hedges. So we did have hedges. We removed those hedges so that we wouldn't have that nuisance of the leaves as much. So the fence would not only add to the neighborhood, but would it help us on keeping the neighborhood clean of those leaves. Every year, I have to clean leaves from the park at least 10 to 15 times every week, basically. And it's become a very big nuisance. Plus, we need a fence. We have a police camera on the corner of our block that basically looks into my yard. So not only for privacy, but for the aesthetic look and to keep the neighborhood more clean.
Okay, thank you. We have another question. Commissioner Jefferson, please go ahead. And just accept the request to unmute.
Have you approved this type of fences in that historic district before?
We have approved fences in this district. Corey, I'll let you talk about it. Yeah.
Sure. What we found was the one occasion where the commission approved a vinyl fence in this historic district was for a shorter fence that was more of an open picket style fence, and it was set back a little further in the yard behind an existing metal fence. Not aware of an exact comparable to this, which has more of a taller solid fence closer to the sidewalk. But as was stated earlier, there are a variety of vinyl, wood, and metal fences in the district that are from pre-designation.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, I'm going to start to request to unmute all of you so that we can close the hearing and begin our discussion. And Commissioner Bland, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Commissioner Gustafson, would you second that motion?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Others? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed? Okay, so the hearing is closed and we'll begin our discussion now. Commissioner Jefferson, since you had a question, would you like to start this one?
Yes. I didn't know what other fences were designated in that historic community because I didn't see any pictures of it. But I do think for me, the fence is a wall, and it says it's 6 feet tall, and I think that's too high. And the other issue is, in my view, is the transparency of the fence. So I might be able to accept a wood fence, but it has to be much lower, 3 feet or 2.5 feet. And it has to be more transparency. I prefer not to see a fence, but I do understand the need of this community to have some kind of the need of homeowners to define their property. But I think this is too dense, and I think the color is too dark, and particularly if you're going to abut a white fence, it architecturally doesn't make much sense. And I think if we could, a certain kind of transparency picket fence, perhaps, I could accept.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Gustafson.
I have no problem with putting a fence in that area. It's I understand the applicant's issue. I think though the fence can actually vary. The entire fence doesn't have to be the same in terms of material and height, which is to say there are, and they could work with staff on this, there are portions of the fence that are closer to the street and more visible. And those should be the height of the, I think I would, if it was the height of a lower height, perhaps the same height as it is now or lower in the areas close to the street, that would work for me. I would have even accepted leaving the chain link, but I understand the applicant doesn't want to do that because it requires the planting. Lowering it in the areas closer to the street, I am not particularly offended by the color. In fact, although I would prefer certainly a wood finish in the parts that are closer to the street. I think that is appropriate. I'm not sure that a vinyl fence that close to the street, I don't think it's appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Shamir Barron.
Thanks. I think I might have preferred, as testimony proposed, a hedge, but I don't think that that a fence is inappropriate. And I agree with Commissioner Gustafson's ideas that potentially the height and also the material of the fence can change, and working with staff, they can resolve that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Holford Smith.
Yes, I agree with the comments of my fellow commissioners. I think that this portion of the fence, I think a fence could be found to be appropriate here, and that the portion that's closer to the street should be a lower height, and wood would be appropriate, I think. But I agree with Commissioner Gustafson that the other portion of the fence could be perhaps taller and a different material, but I think they could work with staff to work out the details of that.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Chapin?
Mr. Chapin isn't here today.
Oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner Goldblum.
I agree with John. I want to note that I just took a little Google Street View tour of the neighborhood, and there are very few fences on this in this area. Most of the houses meet the street with hedges or plantings and are open. So I would hate to see for a precedent to be set that would allow for fences. It would really radically change the quality of the neighborhood. However, in this case where the siting of the house is a bit unusual, it's not immediately in front of the house as it faces the street. I could accept it in the way that John and the others have discussed it.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Devonshire.
Yeah, I agree with John and my colleagues as well.
Okay, and Commissioner Chen?
Yeah, I agree with all the comments from the commissioners. The fence should be lowered.
Okay, Commissioner Bland.
Well, fences don't always make great new neighbors. And I think in this case, the fence that's being proposed is antithetical to the sense of community and this suburban typology that we have here. So I think some of the comments that have been made earlier by the commissioners, I would agree with. It should be maybe not extend out to the street. The problem with vinyl fences, and I know them only too well, is that unlike the houses and the surrounding architecture, which slowly but surely and elegantly degrade, these vinyl fences don't change at all. And they become very apparently oddities. So, and particularly when they're white. So this is not being proposed white, which is a good thing. But I think it should be maybe not extend out to the street as far. I would much prefer it to be wood as opposed to vinyl. But and then if it's going to be higher, I think in the rear yard is where a higher fence would go. So those are a series of comments which more or less align, I think, with some of the other comments. And in my judgment, this applicant could work with staff as opposed to bringing it back, but that would be up to you.
Okay, great, thank you. And Commissioner Lutfi?
I agree with a lot of the comments as well. I'm just going to list them. The height should come down. The materiality needs to change. I think there can be different materials in parts of the fence that are less visible. And then I personally think in terms of the front, it would be nicer if there was a little more air and it didn't read just as a wall.
Okay. Okay, so I think we have a consensus to approve with modifications and ask them to continue to work with the staff. So let me go ahead and make this motion based on the comments that we've made today, and then we'll take a vote after that. So in the matter of docket number 21-05846, 173-02, 113th Avenue in the Addisleigh Park Historic District, a medieval revival style freestanding house with attached garage built in 1935 to 37. This is an application to install a fence. And I note that the building style, scale, materials, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the Addisleigh Park Historic District. I recommend approval, finding that the proposed work will not damage or eliminate any significant architectural features, that the proposed fence will replace an existing chain link fence that was present at the time of designation, and that the proposed fence in the rear and side yard will not be seen in conjunction with the primary facade, that fences enclosing rear and side yards are typical of single-family suburban style houses, and that the enclosure of the side yard with a fence will provide a certain amount of privacy at the rear yard that is not otherwise available to houses sited at the corner. And so due to the unusual siting of this particular house, we find that a fence would be appropriate. However, I find that the 6-foot height and solidity, particularly at the street-facing portion, is taller and less transparent than other houses found throughout the district, and the PVC material that will be seen up close due to its proximity to the sidewalk is not consistent with the materiality of the historic wood fencing and natural materials found in the district. And therefore, I recommend that at the street-facing side, that the height of the fence be lowered and that the materials be revised to be wood, and that other portions of the fence not close to the street, a taller height and different material could be considered, working in consultation with the staff to ensure that it fits contextually within the historic district. Commissioner Jefferson, would you second that motion?
I second the motion.
Thank you. And Rich, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Commissioner Bland,
Aye.
Commissioner Shamir Baran,
Aye.
Commissioner Chen,
Aye.
Commissioner Devonshire,
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum,
Aye.
Commissioner Gustafson,
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson,
Aye.
Commissioner Letby,
Aye.
and Commissioner Holford Smith. Commissioner Holford Smith, are you there? So she might not be here at the moment. I don't see her. Okay, so with 9 in favor and 1 not present, the motion carries.
All right, great. So that's approved with those modifications. Please continue to work with the staff, and we'll move to the next item.
Okay, the next item is number 2, LPC 21-04749, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Brooklyn, Block 1947, Lot 46, 11 Clifton Place in the Clinton Hill Historic District. This is an Italianate-style row house designed by King and Vance and built in 1874. And the application is to construct a rooftop addition and paint the rear facade.
Hello? I'm Mr. Maxwell. Was I able to
Sir,
speak?
the staff will speak with you at a point later today, if you could get in contact with your staff person. Thank you.
So I'm not able to say anything about the property?
Not at the moment. We've moved on to the next item. Thank you. We'll be in touch.
Yes, we closed the hearing, Mr. Maxwell, so the staff will be in touch with you shortly.
Okay, commissioners, the applicants for 11 Clifton Place have entered the hearing. The applicants, you have control of the presentation. Please click on your screen and you may proceed.
Hi, commissioners. I am Brendan Coburn. I'm presenting 11 Clifton Place. And I'm waiting for, there we go. Okay, 11 Clifton Place. We already talked about it. We're going to just jump ahead to the front facade. Can we do that? So this is the existing front facade of the property. We are working with staff on a restoration of that facade and ironwork. And so that is being handled at the staff level. We can pop ahead now to the rooftop addition. So can we go to those sections? Okay, so can we just go back to the existing conditions section, please? Okay, this is the existing section of the building. It's a 2-story plus basement. We are adding a 3rd story. Can we go to the proposed extension? Do we have the one that's the, yeah, thank you. Okay, so this is our 3rd floor extension, and our project is set back 10 feet 3 inches from the front wall of the building. You can see in this project we have a dotted gray line, which shows when we first designed this project, that gray line is describing the original position of this 3rd story extension. Based on feedback from the community, which was concerned about the visibility of this 3rd story extension, we pulled the facade, we reduced the footprint of our building by almost 3 feet, and we lowered it as well and shrunk some of the other portions of the assembly. And so what you are seeing in this drawing highlighted in yellow is the part of the building that remains visible, which is the terracotta flue for the 2 chimney extensions and the 2 party walls, which are to be built entirely out of brick. And if we could, this is just a blow up of that same diagram showing the existing and proposed alterations to the building. You'll also note that we've set the building back off at the rear wall by 3 feet. If we could pop to the mock-up. Sorry, go back to that axon for a second. Just a quick axon to help explain the massing of the building and how it relates to the cornice line of the street. If we could go to the mock-up for, Okay, we have a series of photographs here. The photograph on the left is looking from St. James Place past the Pratt Architecture School. You can see the mock-up in orange at that distance, and then the blow-up is in the upper right-hand corner. So you're seeing the two flues and a little bit of the party wall on the west side of the project. We could take a look at the next. So that's just that blow-up again. Next, please. This is a view as we're coming closer to the house. You're seeing it, the diagram down below. You're looking up and seeing again a little bit of the flue and a little bit of the party wall. The larger image is on the left and the blow-ups on the right. Okay, next. This is head on from across the street, and so you're seeing those two flues, left and right, and again the blow up. And the blow up is actually showing the rendering of the brick wall and the terracotta flue. The larger photograph is showing, the larger contextual photograph is showing the mock-up. Next, please. This is now, we're moving past the house and looking east to west. So again, on the larger contextual photo is on the left, and you can see that we have the flue and the party wall popping up. We have the Pratt School of Architecture is there on the left, and then there is a building on the right which breaks the cornice line that happened a long time ago. And then again, our blow up in the upper right-hand corner. Next. And this is from getting down onto Grand Avenue and looking back towards our project. And you can see in this case between trees and the bulk of the Pratt Architecture School that there's really no significant visibility at that point. Let's see. These are just rooftop photographs of the mock-up. Next. Okay, we're going to move on to the next portion of this filing, which is some modifications to the rear wall. The opening in the rear wall complies with the staff requirements for approval. This project is, what is before you here is the proposed color of blue. And can you just pop to a context photo of the back wall? Maybe showing a little bit more of the block. Okay, so you can see our house is one of a bunch of brick rear walls that have been thorough sealed or stuccoed. Ours is covered in paint, which is coming off. And our client has likes the idea of rebuilding fixing the brick wall and then painting it this blue color. And so that is, so if we could go back to that before and after rendering. So this is our, the issue at hand here is the proposed color. I believe that is it. Is that, did I cover everything sufficiently?
I think so. We'll see if we have any questions. Thank you. Commissioners, are there any questions? We have the rooftop addition and the chimneys and the visibility and the painting of the rear facade. Okay, I don't see any questions right now. So I think you covered it sufficiently, and we may have questions after we take testimony. But we'll now turn to public testimony. And if you're in the meeting and would like to testify on this item, please raise your virtual hand so we can identify you. We will also start with anyone who signed up in advance and then get to everyone else. And I just also want to note that we've received letters on this application, and those letters have all been distributed to the commissioners before today. Thank you.
Okay,
Lisa,
thank you.
I'll turn it over to you. Yep.
Okay, great. And I'm going to just work through the sign-in sheet. So I'm going to start with Sandy. Okay, Sandy, I've brought you in.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please just state your name for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Carroll and Commissioners all. Thank you for this opportunity to weigh in. I'm Sandy Rayburn, As the president of Preserve Our Brooklyn Neighborhoods and being in the heart of Fort Greene and adjacent Clinton Hill, we've been under developer and hot real estate market attacks. Efforts to water down historic constraints and ever more failures to respect the preservation of our patrimonial treasures are what we are facing. And this is where you come in. The plans for a rooftop addition at 11 Clifton Place do not comply with the LPC guidelines for rooftop additions in historic districts, in that the addition will remain visible from the public thoroughfare below, both from across the street and from oblique angles. 11 Clifton Place is just one in a contextual row of 10 small brownstones. This street is unique. Its small-scale houses provide a counterpoint to the more typical rows of taller brownstones on other blocks in the Clinton Hill district. The owner's architect is proposing to put an anomalous rooftop addition using modern materials, and notwithstanding CWB architect's revision dated 4/8, even this so-called redo in LPC 111 and 112 makes clear that the top of the fascia board will be visible, interrupting the historic roofline, and will be seen from the sidewalk thoroughfare. Finally, it's disingenuous for the applicant to justify a visible rooftop addition by presenting photos of adjacent blocks without preservation, without preserved row houses, with taller brownstones on wider streets, and with the grandfathered additional floors built prior to the designation of the Clinton Hill district. Because there is an alternative win-win for both the 11 Clifton Place owners and for the principle of respecting the context and character of this very special block, we would ask that you and the owners take the suggestion of Citizens for Responsible Neighborhood Planning's concealed third floor solution laid out in detail by CRNP. We urge you to reject this proposal in its current so-called revised form and not award a certificate of appropriateness. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Next we have Simeon Bankoff. And Simeon, I brought you in.
And there we go. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Simeon Bankoff, Historic Districts Council. For purposes of full disclosure, the architect for this project, Brendan Coburn, is a member of HGC's board and co-chair of our Public Review Committee. Mr. Coburn did not participate in committee deliberations on this item, nor did he or his firm present it to the committee. Additionally, HGC has been in close contact with members of the community and has spoken with community boards about this project prior to their deliberations on it. This is an instance where engagement with the community has greatly reduced the impact of a project. HGC's only concern about this proposal is actually one that reflects more on the Landmarks Commission. We were surprised to discover that what seemed to be a rather large intervention into the rear facade was a staff level approval. Upon investigation, we recalled that this type of work fell under the amended agency rules. We were concerned about that at the time of the rules amendment, feeling the guidelines were too lenient and might result in the removal of historic materials and configurations. While we can't begrudge the applicant or their designer for following the agency's guidelines, we see now that our concern had a basis in fact. We would urge the Commission to police further applications of this rule very carefully and consider amending it so that these kind of interventions could also benefit from Commissioner and public review. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And next I'm going to bring in Susan Choi.
Hi, thank you very much. Can you hear and see me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. I'll try to stay in my 3 minutes. My name is Susan Choi. I'm an owner of 26 Clifton Place, and I strongly oppose this proposal on the grounds of the rooftop addition, which is and will be clearly visible. This particular block is very unique in the context of our historic district for its modest scale. To quote the designation report for our neighborhood, these small post-Civil War houses were erected for lower middle-class families, while not as impressive as the monumental rows on Grand and Cambridge Place, these dwellings form a unified streetscape with great appeal. That's still true today, although that designation report also notes several disfigurements, ranging from the stripping of features to the adding of, quote, tasteless brick additions, which have raised the heights of some of the buildings. The designation of the block was intended to prevent such stripping and such future adding. And from that time to this one, no visible rooftop addition has ever been made here, and none has been proposed to my knowledge until now. This proposal not only seeks to make such a visible addition, but even cites the same pre-designation alterations deplored by the report. The owners and architects have also submitted a revised proposal with images suggesting that the addition is not visible from the street. This claim is easily refuted by standing on the street and looking at the mock-up, which does remain clearly visible. Further, the owners and architects have compounded the visual impact of the addition by making the setback between the existing cornice and the proposed addition a street-facing recreational deck at the cornice level, barely 30 feet above the sidewalk. Such a deck would be utterly unprecedented and out of context on our block. During their second hearing with Community Board 2, I personally queried the owners as to their intentions regarding this deck, and they affirmed that they did intend to use it recreationally. Yet the plans omit to depict any likely deck furnishings, sun awnings, or people. And so these plans omitting representing these things, these plans actually misrepresent the actual visual impact that this front-facing deck will have when it's in use. Finally, this plan will do lasting damage to our block by setting a precedent for such future additions. The owners and the architect have pointed out that they used less of their unbuilt FAR than they might have, but this argument ignores the context of our block. Despite the uniquely modest height of the houses here, this block of Clifton Place was zoned by the city in a one-size-fits-all manner, which gives our lots here the same amount of FAR as those on the so-called monumental blocks nearby, which are built with 4-story homes. Hence, this block of Clifton Place is both unusually underbuilt, according to the city's guidelines, and unusually vulnerable for that reason. If this addition to 11 Clifton Place is approved, the door will be thrown open to many more such additions. I think it would be really unfortunate if the quality that makes our block so unique, which is the modest height of our buildings, were to result in the destruction of that very unique quality. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And next we have Mark Bench.
Thank you, Lisa, and good afternoon. Good afternoon, Chair Carroll and Commissioners. This is Mark Bench for on behalf of the Victorian Society of New York. Founded in New York City in 1966, the Victorian Society in America is dedicated to fostering the appreciation and preservation of our 19th and early 20th century heritage. The New York chapter promotes preservation of our historic districts, individual landmarks, interiors, and civic art. The Victorian Society in New York can support most aspects of this proposal, with 2 exceptions on the rear facade, namely the proposed almost black paint and a detailing of the large windows on the lower 2 floors. First, we thank the applicants for their decisions to remove several modern elements from the front, including the square-headed aluminum windows and the minimally detailed fence and stoop railings, and replace them with appropriate materials, including arch-headed black painted windows and appropriate black painted iron railings. The Victorian Society in New York finds the proposed rooftop addition to be acceptable, as it will not require removing any historic material, is modestly scaled, and because the only portions of the addition which will be visible, namely the brick demising walls and chimney, will be minimally visible from the street or from a considerable distance in conjunction with a large building at 345 Classen Avenue. But we have some concerns with the proposed changes at the non-visible rear facade. The applicant's decision to paint the handsome red brick cladding will obscure important historic material, and the proposed very dark Newburyport blue paint render will introduce a color which is atypical for 19th century row houses and will diminish the unity of the donut. If there are deteriorated bricks that can be replaced, possibly using some historic brick, which will be removed to install the windows on the 2 lower floors, Inconsistencies in the appearance of brick and mortar can be remedied through the use of compatible translucent masonry stains designed for this very purpose. Lastly, we are also concerned about the detailing of these large windows on the ground and parlor floors. The design obscures the actual floor lines of the house. We urge the Commission to require the use of a brick spandrel panel between these banks of windows. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next we have Ann Bush. Okay, and we just need to have you unmute yourself. There you go.
Can you see
Yes,
me?
we
Hear
can
me?
hear you. Yes, now it's
Okay.
better. Yeah.
Okay. Good afternoon, Chair Carroll, Vice Chair Bland, and the other LPC commissioners. My name is Ann Bush. I'm president for the Society for Clinton Hill. And as you know, we did the landmarking for the district back in 1981. And since then, we have really tried to keep up with the construction activity in the district, of which you know the last several years have been highly active. We have submitted written detailed testimony to the LPC on this proposal, and I want to thank the LPC for their continued vigilance in monitoring activity in landmark districts and continuing to designate new landmark districts in order to preserve the great history of New York in all areas. We oppose the proposal for 11 Clifton Place as submitted. We have reviewed videos, renditions, drawings, and met with the architects and homeowners on March 3rd. We have also submitted to homeowners and architects plans that would comply with LPC guidelines. Justification by the homeowners and architects seems to be by comparing to Pratt buildings in the area and other four-story structures on the block. It should be noted that the other four-story structures on the block already existed prior to the landmarking in 1981, and any Pratt buildings are commercial and not comparable. The addition, which is the major construction, includes a rooftop deck in the front of the house, which we assume will be actively used and is clearly visible from the street. The materials that they intend to include also contain brick, which is not part of the original structure right now, again, adding to the contrast and the visibility. Both would change the character of the current block, which is uniform 19th century row house block. And finally, precedent. For any new construction going forward, this will be pointed to as precedent if it is approved as submitted. We urge the LPC to disapprove the 11 Clifton Place proposal as submitted, and we thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Mark Van Hoff. Okay, Mark Van Hoff, there you go.
Hi there, can you see me?
Yes. Please just state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Yep. Hold on 1 second. Good afternoon, Chair Carroll, Vice Chair Bland, and Commissioners of the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission. My name is Mark Von Hoff, and I'm representing a multi-generational household living at 17 Clifton Place. Historically, it's important to note that Truman Capote also lived in our house in 1946. This testimony is in opposition to the LPC exterior alteration application for 11 Clifton Place, specifically the proposed third floor addition to the existing two-story building. The rooftop addition remains significantly visible from various viewpoints standing on the street, contrary to the LPC permit guidebook, noting that the invisibility of an addition is a critical consideration in approving the rooftop addition. This visibility will further increase should solar panels be installed at an angle to maximize energy requirements, as installed at 19 Clifton Place. The precedent images provided by the applicant, specifically 272 Lafayette, incorrectly noted as 77 St. James on the application, is very visible from the street. And I'm afraid a single example of this on the 1947 block of Clifton Place would significantly alter the street's character. Historically, most of this block of Clifton Place has consisted of two-story buildings. Unlike the grander and taller buildings of the neighboring streets, this lower scale street has been inhabited by less prosperous middle-class families and individuals. Both the scale of the lower buildings and location of this block, which terminates into St. James, create a unique muse-like historical quality, which are described by Truman Capote in a letter while living at 17 Clifton Place. The proposed rooftop addition in 11 Clifton Place threatens this unique historical quality, which has remained consistently the same. Architecturally, Clifton Place is a wider street going in the east-west direction, dominated by two-story structures, which allows for south daylight, even in the winter months, to wash the street. The detailing of the buildings is less decorative than the neighboring streets, with no contemporary additions or rooftop garden terraces. The proposed rooftop addition and terrace at 11 Clifton Place is not in character with or in scale of the street. It will also limit the views of the skyline and limit the light flow unique to the street, especially in the rear courtyards to the north. The scale of the 1947 block of Clifton Place has remained unchanged for the last several decades, and as a result has maintained a unique character that is greatly appreciated by the neighborhood at large. There have been significant changes on Clifton Place east of Grand Avenue, outside of the LPC district over the last decade, which have significantly negatively changed the character of the street. The approval of this visible rooftop addition at 11 Clifton Place by the LPC would set a dangerous precedent that would significantly risk altering the character of the 1947 block of Clifton Place. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next we have Rosaria Sinisi. Okay, Rosaria, you just need to unmute yourself. There you go.
Okay, great. My name is Rosaria Sinisi. Thank you, Chair Carroll, Commissioners. I'm the president of Citizens for Responsible Neighborhood Planning of Clinton Hill and Fort Greene, which opposes this application. Brooklyn CB2's Land Use Committee disapproved it on March 17th for two reasons. First, the rooftop addition would be visible from the street, and second, the proposed work would change the character of the historic block. Applicants' revisions dated April 8th do not resolve either issue, and you've received at least a dozen letters in opposition, including 5 from local groups involved in historic district designation and preservation, and 2 from architects living in the immediate area. The streetscape of Clifton between Grand and St. James is unique in the Clinton Hill Historic District, consisting of 2 well-preserved rows of lower middle-class brownstones, most with basement and 2 stories to their approximately 33-foot cornices. The 4 houses out of 33 cited by applicant with higher facades were modified pre-designation with windows matching those below and most with 19th century cornices. They do not provide context for a visible rooftop addition in modern materials. This addition, despite applicant's modifications to his plan since its presentations at CB2, would be visible from both across the street and from oblique angles at each end of the block. Applicant's April 8th supporting materials, including in particular its rooftop mock-up, contain errors and omissions. When viewed from the street, the mock-up would lead one to believe that the addition would be less visible than it actually would be in reality. The front flat wall of the mock-up was built further away from the facade than the surfaces that would be closer to the street, and does not accurately represent the positions of its top flat fascia board or the endpoints of its elevated parapet walls. Local groups involved in historic districting and designation have suggested to the applicant a historically accurate solution that would permit the construction of a rooftop addition that would be invisible from the street. This was used in at least 6 other small brownstones on the block designed by the Parfit brothers, as well as others on adjacent blocks. Applicant could use this solution and put its deck on the north side of the building, avoiding visibility from the street. Section views of this solution are attached to CRNP's letter. Applicant has repeatedly cited to Higgins Hall, the Pratt Architecture School, with an entrance on St. James Place and consisting of 3 enormous conjoined institutional buildings for context with its proposal. This building, as well as others it is cited to on Lafayette Avenue and elsewhere, have no relationship to the much smaller scale of the Clifton Place residential streetscape. And I'd like to add that the Classen address that was just cited by the Victorian Society is a couple blocks away, and I don't believe it's in the historic district. The area way is also a concern, and we feel that it should be subject to full review rather than just staff, as the plans include destruction of original historic materials, that is all the large bluestone flags, and would alter the relationship between the facade and its framing stoops, calling attention to 11 Clifton as being wholly different from the 9 other area ways in the continuous row of 10 King and Vance houses of which it is a part.
I'm sorry, you've gone over your 3 minutes. Could you start to wrap up, please?
Sir. Approval of this application would forever alter the historic streetscape of unique block of the Clinton Hill Historic District and constitute a dangerous precedent for future incursions into the block, the district, and historic districts citywide. We therefore urge the LPC not to grant this application for a certificate of appropriateness. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and with that, I don't see any of their hands raised.
All right, thank you, Lisa.
Wait,
and
I apologize.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, Robin Lentz. Okay, Robin, I've brought you in. Please just state your name for the record in 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Robin Lentz. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. My husband and I purchased 9 Clifton Place 23 years ago. We're right next door to number 11. Our 2 buildings are at the center of the intact row of King and Vance houses that many have been referencing. In the last 2 decades, Joe and I have been involved in restoring not 1, but 2 buildings on Clifton Place. In 2019, we received the Lucy Moses Award for our efforts with number 39, the building on the corner. Because we never sought to be exempt from any of the established rules and norms, I never even knew about land use committee meetings or landmarks hearings. Now that I've seen how this works though, I have to say that the need to point to a precedent to prove that your project is appropriate is the part that I find the most unsettling with regards to this proposal. Throughout this process, the architects have used all kinds of existing visible additions or modern structures as rationale for their plans. They've referenced pre-designation tall buildings on the block, and they ventured off the block to show examples of modern structures, all in an effort to prove precedent. So frankly, what I see here is a new precedent waiting to happen, something that could throw open the door for future owners and architects who set their sights on the little houses on Clifton Place. If the proposal at 11 goes through as planned, this will be the modern visible addition that others point to justify their own projects. The next architect will show pictures of this addition from different angles with a focus on how visible it is, I imagine, to say an example of this sort of thing already exists on the block. We are not asking for anything out of the ordinary. They won't even have to go off the block or point to pre-designation homes to find examples that support their vision. Our low-profile, modest buildings will always be vulnerable. The historic district designation has not only protected and preserved this block since 1981, it has ensured that any improvements stay on the rails, so to speak, and serve the greater good. Case in point, in 1981, our house was covered in permastone. It had a white railing and a green stoop. In 2001, we restored it to the original brownstone. The proposal at number 11, I believe, is the first one on this block to challenge the landmarks rules about visible extra rooftop additions, but it certainly won't be the last. So many of us have stayed within the guidelines as we've restored and renovated these 100-year-old homes to preserve them, as well as make them suit our modern lifestyles. I'd like to think all of that effort wasn't for nothing. Thank you for taking this into consideration.
Okay, thank you. And I see one more hand raised, Pete Wells. And Pete.
Yes, am I in?
Okay, yes, please state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Yes, this is Pete Wells. I'm an owner of 11 Clifton Place. I have changed addresses, Truman Capote wrote to a friend in 1946, have moved to a little lost muse in darkest Brooklyn. The apartment Capote had found was in 17 Clifton Place, which through a quirk of numbering is next door to number 11. And though the block is not in fact a muse, Capote's word choice is not accidental. The 3- and 4-story brownstones that run up one side of the block and down the other, almost without interruption, are shorter and smaller than some of the nearby carriage houses in the neighborhood. The roof line is so low that from almost anywhere on the block, you can see sky without lifting your head. Capote moved to Clifton Place, he wrote, to get away from hectic, nerve-wracking influences, to escape and get on with my work. That work was writing fiction, including the semi-autobiographical Other Voices, Other Rooms, his first published novel, and a landmark in LGBTQ literature. 2 or so years later, after he'd satisfied his desire for tranquility and begun to complain that he couldn't get any of his friends to visit him in Brooklyn, Capote returned to Manhattan. But the quiet, low-rise, unpretentious block continued to draw writers and artists. From 2008 to 2020, the block was the site of a Black-owned coffee shop called Urban Vintage Cafe that was a meeting space for Brooklyn's Black creative community. Capote might have found it too hectic, and if he came back to the block today and walked around the corner to St. James Place to look at Stephen Hall Architects' 2006 addition to Higgins Hall at Pratt Institute, he might be in shock with its precast concrete columns, exposed steel beams, and glowing skin of structural glass planks. It is a clear stylistic break with the surrounding buildings. But Capote would notice something else. The Higgins Hall addition is not visible from any point on Clifton Place. According to the project architect, the designers and Pratt decided early on to, quote, limit the new insertion to the massing of the original center wing, close quote, which had been destroyed in a fire. Quote, while the height doesn't conform to the original massing exactly, it is pretty close, close quote. This is one of the most significant contemporary buildings to be built in Brooklyn in the past 2 decades, and yet it stays within the existing skyline. No part of it rises high enough to be seen above the townhouses of Clifton. Sadly, this is not the case with the proposed addition to Capote's next door neighbor. It is all too easy to spot. Because the houses of Clifton Place are so short, particularly on the north side of the block, almost anything you put on top of them will change how the street looks. The beauty of this block is the way all the houses work together. They give an impression of a small cooperative village where nobody tries to show off by building a bigger or fancier house. Clifton Place gives us a rare, uncharacteristic break from New York's relentless urge to build bigger and taller. I want to thank the Commission for paying attention to this special block and urge it to preserve the low, nearly uniform height so that people 50 years from now can make a special detour to see Capote's lost little muse. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I don't see any other hands raised. Oh, okay. I have one more hand. I just want to remind people to please don't go over the 3-minute timeline. Okay, Professor, all right, missed the last name. Sidatis?
Yeah.
I've brought you in.
Hi, thank you. Hi. Yeah, my name is Judith Siditis. My husband and I live at 20 Clifton Place, and he is a restorative architect. So it is a great concern to us that this proposed addition not be accepted by Landmark Commission. So dear Chair Carroll and Vice Chair Bland, I do want to thank you for letting me add my voice to the chorus from our Clifton Place neighbors in opposition to the proposed changes to 11 Clifton Place. As you've heard over and over again, ours is the only section of Clinton Hill that is landmarked and has these modest, I think, beautiful Italianate brownstone row houses. The inhabitants here we cherish and work to restore, as Robin so eloquently explained, to preserve the feel and look of the neighborhood. As I mentioned, my husband is a preservationist architect and noted a real important discrepancy that the drawings submitted do not match up accurately with the actual mock-up that we see, suggesting that the proposed addition will not be as visible as it would be. And already the mock-up is visible from the front of the sidewalk and both from oblique angles. Well, after we bought this home, we worked on it for 3 years ourselves. We're not particularly wealthy, so we had to work among the dust and rubble to bring the infrastructure of our home up to code while restoring the outside facade and all the remaining details inside. And we did this, as Robin did, all according to landmark guidelines. We really urged that the Landmark Commission not open the door to allow people to run roughshod over these guidelines. Even though the proposals have been modified, they still blatantly fly in the face of the spirit of the preservation regulations. And would break up the most continuous roof line in our area. And just as disturbing, as many people have noted, would set a very dangerous precedent for the future. Many of the homes in this block have a hidden third floor, ours included. And we certainly don't begrudge anyone their own third floor, but ask that landmarks request that their regulations be followed and not abridge their own rules. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And I don't see any other hands raised.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lisa. And as I mentioned earlier, and this has been mentioned in the testimony, we did receive letters which have been distributed, but I'll ask Rich now to summarize those and let us know if there's any additional written testimony.
Sure. So we did receive an email from Brooklyn Community Board 2, and they recommended denial of the application. And we received a total of 20 letters in opposition, including from several neighbors and organizations that we heard from today.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'd like to turn back to the applicant. Mr. Coburn, would you like to respond to the comments, in particular comments about the visibility in the context of these particular buildings? And I think there were also questions about the accuracy of the mock-up. So if you could address that as well.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I would say that I think our intent in this was to preserve the uniform cornice line of this block, and that was our approach to this addition. For that reason, was always to push it back as far as we could. We had some sort of design details in the initial scheme that had overhangs and had a roof overhang on the front of the house, and the party walls were pushed further forward based on that resistance that we were receiving from the neighbors. We then pulled off a significant portion of the overhang, pushed the facade and the floor plan back by 2.5 feet for an overall sort of reduction in the front leading edge of almost 4 feet. The mock-up is accurate. The front wall of the mock-up is built at the line of the front of the fascia piece, and it also includes the party walls and the two flue pipes, terracotta flue pipes. So I do think that this project sets a precedent, and I appreciate the precedent it's setting. And I do think that the neighbors are correct that other additions will be proposed for this block as the environment, as the neighborhood continues to evolve over time. That always happens in these row house neighborhoods. And our approach was to make this as minimally visible an addition to this block as possible. And I do believe that as you walk down this street, what is up there will not be seen. I think to address the deck issue, the deck is it's simply not visible, and it's outside of a master bedroom. I actually think it will be used almost not at all, other than to walk out and see what the weather is. And so the portrayal of it as being anything other than invisible is not correct. So again, if you look at this drawing, we are talking about 2 feet of visibility of a terracotta flue pipe and a little bit of a brick wall, and a brick parapet wall and chimney are certainly a contextual element within a historic district. So I think that addresses some of the comments. Thanks.
Okay, and can you just go to the slide that shows the most visibility of that brick wall? The view, yeah.
Is that the one you're looking for?
Well, I'm asking you actually which one is the place where you see the most of it.
I think this might be it. Yeah, so this one you're seeing the two brick party walls, which would be red brick to match the surrounding, and you're seeing the 2 terracotta flues, and you are seeing a bit of the lead-coated copper fascia. And the lead-coated copper fascia is certainly a material that's used in roofscapes throughout brownstone Brooklyn. I think that this is the most visible spot.
Okay. And is this a zoom view or a regular view?
This is a blown up view. So if you could just pull back, there's a view from further back. Jenna, do you want to just go to the one that's closer oblique from the west? I think maybe photo 2. There's photo 2. So you're seeing on the larger photo, the contextual photo, you can see that one side of the brick wall, and then we're showing the blow up here on the right. And I do think, I do think that contextually, it's one thing to say that things in the background are not part of the issue, but the apartment building over on Lafayette is certainly going to absorb the roofscape of the apartment building in Lafayette will absorb anything that's poking up here. This is just an extremely modest intervention.
Okay, thank you. There was also testimony about the choice of blue for the paint on the rear facade, if you want to address that.
I think the thing is, this is the client's preference for it, and we appreciate it. I think that if it alone was a deal breaker, we would just propose repointing the brick, restoring the brick. I think we can get it back to just brick rather than red painted brick. I'm pretty sure of that. So I think that would be the approach I would push for with the client, is to just restore the brick, point it, clean it up, call it a day.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you. Okay, commissioners, any other questions? Any other questions? Okay, I am starting to unmute everybody, so look for that request so that we can make a motion to close the hearing and begin our discussion. Okay, and Commissioner Gustafson, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
And Commissioner Devonshire, would you second that motion?
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the hearing is closed and we'll begin our discussion. So commissioners, we have 2 items before us to comment on: the rooftop addition and the paint color on the rear facade. So we'll begin our discussion. Commissioner Lutfi, would you like to start this one? Okay, I think she cannot do that yet. Commissioner Devonshire, would you like to start this one?
Sure. I believe that the color on the rear facade is not appropriate. I do have to say I was taken a little bit aback by the size of that opening on the rear facade and the fact that that is approvable at staff level. That to me is a significant amount of historic fabric that's being replaced, and whatever the amendment was, it is what it is, but I was taken slightly aback. I am okay with a rooftop addition here, but I think it needs to be completely non-visible. That's the only thing I'd be able to approve.
Okay, Commissioner Chen?
Yeah, I agree with the testimony and I think the rear facade, I agree with Commissioner Devonshire that it should be, restored rather than painted in the blue color. As for the visibility, I would defer to the majority. I think from the angle, it looks like it's minimally visible, but I would defer to the majority of the commissioners.
Okay, Commissioner, I don't know if Commissioner Lutfi is available yet. Commissioner Lutfi, are you there?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, great. That's okay.
So I have to say I'm really sympathetic to the people who live in the community and who have invested in the community and who want to maintain the integrity of homes and their block. That's important to me as well. But I have to say that I think that this project is really modest in terms of its impact on that. I think the visibility at the top is minimal. It's the chimneys and, just minor additions. I think for me, the issue, the one that was raised about the color color of the paint in the back, that it doesn't seem to be consistent with what's there. And I think that it would be good if the applicant could work with staff to pick some kind of finish, or, go back to just the color of the brick that's there. And I think other than that, it works with what's in the neighborhood.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Jefferson?
Yes. It's always an issue for me, the degree of visibility of rooftop additions. And it's very difficult for me to 2 feet back or 3 feet back. In this particular case, because the community is so verbal about wanting to not see almost anything, there's only 4 buildings. So I think if you push it back a foot or 2, it'll be fine. So I think it should not be visible. And in terms of the blue color in the back, I just painted the color of the existing fabric, and then we go home.
Okay. Commissioner Gustafson?
Starting in the back, painting the wall is fine, but I think they need to work with staff to find a more appropriate color. I don't believe I've ever seen a blue as an appropriate color. In the front, I will. My position going in was that I thought they're getting a lot of space up there, and it is and it's rare that we approve a visible a rooftop addition in an environment like this. I mean, we do minimally visible at times, but and so here I would I think it would be appropriate if they set it back slightly to eliminate that visibility or reduce it. I must admit, though, I was surprised at the volume of testimony in light of, as our staff has vouched for, the accuracy of the renderings here. It's only got a little bit to go before it becomes appropriate.
Okay. Commissioner Shamir Barron?
Yes, I have no problem with the blue, and I think that the exact shade of blues towards grays there are lots of them, and I think that it's entirely appropriate. And I do agree with others that there can be a rooftop addition here, but it should be not visible at all.
Okay, and Commissioner Goldblum?
Well, I
I think that the back is fine. I don't think that the opening is excessive. I think it's appropriate. I think that the blue color is appropriate as is. The walls of the interior courtyard are now of varied colors. If you look at the interior photos, for me, the visibility of the rooftop addition is not significant. But if you go to page 104, LPC 104, that for me is the greater concern. And what that does show is that the block has almost no rooftop additions on it. There's one on the opposite street. There's one building on the block that has a pre-designation addition, and the uniformity of the roofscape, irrespective of the visibility, I think is a consideration that we have talked about in the past, and that I think is important. When you do have a pristine block or very, very much unenlarged block, I think the volume in and of itself, irrespective of visibility, is a factor that we can consider, and I would consider it here. So I think that the uniformity of the block and the absence of rooftop additions would, for me, argue for removal of the rooftop addition, irrespective of visibility.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So here's where we are. I think we have, and I just want to say, and I respect that opinion, Commissioner Goldblum. I know that you do have feelings about rooftop additions in rows where there are no other rooftop additions. I think, historically, the commission has sort of thought about scale and regardless of visibility, but also visibility, particularly for rooftop additions where it's on the roof and not affecting, adjacent rear yards in the same way a rear yard addition does, has allowed for more expansion in that location and really focused most of the evaluation on visibility. So, in this case, I do recognize that the row doesn't have anything that's visible. I do think there is variety within the street and, some minimal and very, very modest minimal visibility could be okay. But I think the majority of commissioners present would like to see it set back further to be not visible. So I think the commissioners present, I think, and I know we do have some support for the blue, but again, I think the majority of the commissioners present would not support the blue color as proposed. So I think we might be able to vote this out with a motion to set the rooftop addition, to either set the rooftop addition back or lower it to eliminate the visibility of the parapet walls, and to work with the staff on an appropriate paint color for the rear facade. So, Commissioner Devonshire, do you think you could make that motion?
I'll do my best.
Thanks.
Sorry. In the matter of 11 Clifton Place in the Clinton Hill Historic District, an application to construct a rooftop addition and paint the rear facade, I recommend approval with some modifications, finding that the proposed work will not eliminate or damage any significant architectural features. The rooftop addition and chimney extensions will only be minimally visible from the public thoroughfare. That materials, finishes, and simple massing of the addition and chimneys will help them remain a secondary presence in views of the house and streetscape. The addition will be modest in size and set back from the front and rear parapets, maintaining visual cues to the historic massing of the house, and the painting of the rear facade, which is not visible from a public thoroughfare, will help conceal the remnants of a cementitious coating that detracts from the house. However, I find that the dark blue paint will not match the color of historic masonry or be in keeping with the light finishes found on rear facades of neighboring buildings. And it's an atypical finish and will not have a harmonious presence in the block, and that the block is low in scale, and thus a rooftop addition will not be harmonious with the rest of the block. Therefore, the color of the paint, the applicant will work with the staff so that the color of the paint match and the color of the brickwork will be closer to the off-white finishes of the coatings of the neighboring houses. and the rooftop addition will be modified in size so as to be non-visible.
Great, thank you. And Commissioner Chen, would you second that motion?
Seconded.
Thank you. And Rich, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Commissioner Shamir Barron,
Aye.
Commissioner Chen,
Aye.
I'm sorry, I was frozen for a second. Can you repeat that?
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Devonshire,
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum, Commissioner Goldblum? Is he not there?
I think we lost him.
Okay. Commissioner Gustafson,
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson,
Aye.
Commissioner Lutfi,
Aye.
and I believe Commissioners Bland and Holford Smith are not voting on this particular item, correct?
That's correct. They were not present for the entire presentation.
Okay. So with 7 in favor and 3 not present, the motion carries.
All right, that's approved. Please continue to work with the staff on those modifications. And we are almost a half hour behind schedule, so we are going to take a break now for lunch for 30 minutes. And then we will resume with public hearing item number 3, which it was scheduled to be the last item before lunch. So we'll start with that item when we come back. And so commissioners, if you can just turn your audio and video off, and we'll ask all members of the public to exit the meeting now so that you can re-enter at